Hello, Internet. Gino, that's Gino Greco here again with another episode and the final episode of Final Fantasy by the Dozen, our Final Fantasy XII podcast. We did it. We've gotten to the end of Final Fantasy XII. I have finished it, or it's finished with me. In any case, I don't have to play it anymore, and that's excellent. And since we're discussing Final Fantasy, I am joined, as always, by Chris ZombiePie Redacted.
Hey, everybody. We finished another one. Another one beats the dust, or eats the dust. How does that saying go?
Bites the
dust. Dust. Another one bites the dust. We got another one in the bag. This one, it'll be interesting to rank, considering how we have two disparate versions of the game being compared side by side, but we'll deal with that when we get there.
Yes. Speaking of which, I need to find my rankings. I've got my rankings somewhere. Do you have the rankings in case I can't find the rankings?
I mean, it might be hidden in like some sort of Google Doc folder that I've got that I don't ever use until we have the final episodes of these podcasts. You have it physically written down. We should point this out.
I'm going to need to I'll find it at some point during the show, I'm sure. I've got a notebook somewhere with this very important note in it.
Yeah, mine's is super out of date, so it's no help.
So, for these last few podcasts, we also have another special guest, Matthew, the boss of bosses, Rorie.
Hello. I'm joined here by my two dogs and my lovely fiance. My dogs might bark if they hear something outside. So if you hear a sharp screeching sound in the background, that's
frantic shushing.
What kind of?
Oh, we don't shush them. We let them bark, but we get pretty loud, unfortunately.
What kind of doggies?
Little poodle mixes, a couple little yaps. Yeah, they're usually pretty quiet. They're tired right now. But if they hear, the mailman coming in or anything like that, we'll go to investigate. So, a heads up, a warning.
Yeah, my large idiot son is a golden doodle.
There you go. Oh, those guys are dumb.
Yeah, he is my large idiot son. He's 85 pounds of daw. But without further ado, let's get to the moment, the task at hand. So,
you sound so dour.
Before we get to Final Fantasy XII, just a reminder, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. We don't have any Final Fantasy-related feedback. That's fine. I'm not going to do close-up magic for this podcast.
Nope,
because
we got a lot to talk about.
We've got too much to talk about for me to do close-up magic. And we also, in case you just follow the Final Fantasy podcasts and you don't follow the other shows. One, what are you doing? Come on, we have regular podcasts every week.
Looking at the ratings, it appears that there are these people.
Yes.
Don't talk back to them.
I know. First off, we have other shows, but if you just listen to the Final Fantasy podcast, you might not be aware. We've started a Patreon for the podcast because it's been 3+ years of doing this show, and I think we've been delivering good content, and hopefully you agree with us. And if that's the case, you can support us at patreon.com/deeplistens and get to join our Discord and our community and hear more from us on a more regular basis. So if you feel like supporting us, please do so at that site I just said. So, without further ado, when we were last talking about Final Fantasy XII, we were at Sochen Cave Palace.
Well, the rest of us was able to do our homework assignment. Someone encountered difficulties because their cheesy king of the cheese started to bite them in the butt.
Yeah, so I didn't level up my characters until I got to Sochen Cave Palace, and when I got there, I was having a hard time making my way through. I got past the Mandragoras by just using a quickening, and like 2 quickenings in a row killed all of them. But then the final boss in the palace is Ahriman, which is this giant ghosty guy, and I was able to burst like 50% of his health with a quickening, but then he starts dividing into like multiple versions of himself.
Yeah, he's tough, and you got to spread out and everything like that. It was a really tough fight.
Yeah, and he hits you with negative status effects. It's a real bummer of a fight.
He casts Doom, which seems like a real messed up status effect this early in the game. It's like mid-late, but
even still, you don't have a rise. You don't have the good reviving magics yet, and I didn't.
I never found a rise.
Really?
I never found it. Yeah, I had no idea where it is. I was looking at people. So I was watching the end of the game, and I saw somebody casting a rise, and I missed multiple spells, which I think we'll talk about about how much stuff I think me and we all kind of missed some stuff that is really easy to miss.
Yeah,
for how critical some of this stuff is to the game. Yeah,
it's
really dumb.
really messed up.
Yeah, the game asks you to double back a bunch of places if you want to get all the stuff you want. But
there is one. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say for this boss, the way that I actually beat him was I hit him with a quickening burst. Then he divided. I removed. He only divided once. I killed the little clone, hit the real one with another quickening chain, and then I used like an elixir or something and used another quickening chain. Like I didn't fight him legitimately at any point. I used like 3 quickenings and happened to get enough of a burst of damage off of them to kill him without actually having to fight him properly.
Quickenings must have been a lot better in the base game because I kept on using them and they did barely anything to any boss that I tried to use them on. They're not really needed for any regular fights, and when I tried to use them against bosses, they would do like I would get all of my quickening ranks used up, and I'd do like 5% damage or like a barely imperceptible mark on their health line. It felt like they really nerfed them into the ground in the Zodiac Age version.
Yeah, so the way that it works. The big difference is that in the Zodiac Age, you've got missed charges, which how do those even increase for you?
Just battle. Yeah, they'll
battle.
Restore over time.
They're basically the Final Fantasy VII, like, once you make enough battles and kill enough opponents, you get your missed meter charged up.
Okay, because in my version, it's just your MP bar. So it...
Oh, wow.
It's... Every mischarge you get after the first one also increases your MP meter by... so the second mischarge you get doubles your MP, and then the third one, I think, triples your MP. So my total MP was probably significantly higher than yours. And that also meant that if I used ethers or elixirs or high ethers, like any of those items just basically got me access to quickenings again. And the way that the quickenings actually work is the number of attacks that you do. It has some relevance on the damage that's done, but the key is the follow-up attack that happens at the very end, and those depend on which like combination of attacks you did. So if you do a bunch of level 1 attacks, like the most you can get, I think, is Inferno, which is a pretty early in the game. It's fine, but against some of the later bosses, it'll only do a few thousand damage, so it's pretty worthless. But if you can get like multiple level 3 quickening attacks in your chain, you can get up to things like Black Hole, which can deal like 30,000 or 40,000 damage by itself, not even counting the damage that's done by your attacks that you're doing. And in those cases, I was able, even for later bosses, to deal like a quarter of their HP. It was usually how I would finish bosses off. Ahriman was the last boss I was able to just cheese with quickenings. After this, the boss's life totals were too high, and I had to actually grind levels to not die immediately.
Yeah.
The one thing that... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So the one thing that both Ahriman and the previous Mondragon bosses kind of highlight to me is how, especially in these boss battles, when you have multiple targets on the screen and they are all of high level and can really impact the game, the gambit system is do or die, and it's incredibly frustrating to have these gambits that have done well in the primary area of the dungeon or the environment that you've been in, to see them just completely fail when you're in a high-risk scenario.
Yeah. The way that the Gambit system works, because you have to basically program these characters, in cases where all of a sudden your Gambits don't work or they're unideal, at least in my version, I didn't see a way to save presets.
Nope.
Which means that every time you adjust it, like, there's the Gambits that you want wandering around, and then there's the Gambits you want for specific boss battles.
This was super frustrating in Final Fantasy XIII as well. Like they had because you'd switch characters out and basically everything was busted, so you'd have to redo them all every time you flipped a character in or out of your party. It's a little bit better in 12 when you have. I don't know how they got worse in the next game.
Yeah.
But with 12, you can't save anything, which sucks. But at least you know your if you have characters that have roles, you can have kind of the tank healer DPS kind of trilogy in there and flip people in and out that way. But yeah, it was really frustrating not be able to save a couple of just like, here's all my, like, just make them and label them. It would have been really nice, but they seemed like that it would have been amazing handy in 13 too. They just never seem to think out the last little step of these systems they make for character advancement or skills.
Yeah, and I found, like, there are some abilities that you want all the time, like your auto attack ones. There were certain I needed like 2 or 3 different gambits.
Yeah.
To just make auto-attacking behave the way I thought it should. Like, attack the closest thing. Everyone should focus on the same enemy. If an enemy's low on HP, kill that before you move on to the next enemy. You know, just basic sort of stuff. But then there'd be some bosses where all of a sudden, like, my healing macros wouldn't work properly because all of a sudden they overwhelmed the curing magics that I would use in regular encounters.
Or in the case of Ahriman, you would have everyone set up to attack whatever is closest to you, and now you're going back and forth on these 2 targets rather than focusing on one target because they keep teleporting and moving around quickly.
Or sometimes there's enemies where the little enemies need to die, and you'd rather have everyone focusing on something different because it's a bunch of enemies with low HP. And it's just those little subtle tweaks that it felt tedious rather than interesting or snappy, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of just playing the game, you're programming the game to play itself. And it felt, again, like I was debugging a program instead of playing a video game.
Yeah.
I think that in my case, at least, we were on the Zodiac Age, so being able to play at 4x speed, our first half or first like 2/3 of the game, you can really just over level even boss fights. If you're playing around just killing everything, I definitely had the experience where I didn't really have to change all that much in my tactics for boss fights because I was so over leveled they were dying pretty quick anyways. And by the time I get to the end of the game, or stuff we'll talk about a little bit later, where they do start throwing odd status effects at you and everything like that you do have to adjust and adapt to, I think I kind of missed a lot of like probably pretty simple stuff to do with the gambit system that I just didn't have to worry about early on. So I just kind of never got the skill set to actually adjust some of the stuff. And I was looking at some walkthroughs at the end of the game, and they had entirely way more effective strategies for this kind of stuff than I did, which would have been nice to know earlier. But this is really one of the Final Fantasies where I think that you really kind of have to have a walkthrough along to get the most out of it. I don't really have felt that way about a lot of the other ones. Like, I'm not even talking about missing side content. I'm talking about missing pretty core parts of the game if you don't follow along with a walkthrough, which is pretty frustrating in retrospect.
But like, it was the big problem I have with, like, even when I did that, it's like, you can now pick up haste in this room in a chest, and it's like, where's the fucking chest?
Yeah.
There's no chest here. Oh, wait, There's a drop rate of 20%, so I have to keep coming in and out of this environment until it spawns.
It's a nightmare system for if it's like an optional weapon at the end of the game, okay. But the one I had to do last night was one of the reasons I didn't get very far. Is I had to go back and find the spell called Cleanse, which is the only way to get through a certain boss fight. And Cleanse was only in one region of the game in one chest that had a 20% spawn rate. So I had to go back and like basically look around for like an hour and a half just to get past this one boss, which we'll get to later. But it was super frustrating.
And there's totally. On top of that, you can also have the chest not spawn the item. Like, the chest has a 20% spawn rate, and then the item might have a 50% to be, like, a fucking potion. And then the other 50% of the time, it's an incredibly useful spell.
And in a lot of cases, the spells will, once you pass them in the game, they'll be available for purchase at a vendor later on. The one I'm talking about, Cleanse, the walkthrough I read said it was available in a certain vendor, but it wasn't. I went back there and it was not there. They really should have made it so that every time you pass, I mean, it's great to have a spell or something a little bit earlier, but if you're missing critical shit like this, they should put them all on every vendor list after a certain amount of time after you could have had the first opportunity to get them, because otherwise it's just insane that you have to go find a walkthrough to figure this stuff out.
They definitely in this game they managed to make so many different specific curing spells that just keeping your characters healthy depending on what enemies you're up against. Like, they have a specific white magic for getting rid of poison, silence.
Yep.
I think blind.
Asuna in the other games was a much more effective spell than it is here because Asuna still works, but it doesn't. There's a million different side effects. Even and beyond that, like the 4 different levels of cure.
Work.
The 4 different levels of cure feel like a lot to deal with. I know that's pretty standard for Final Fantasy games, but I had one character that could cast Cure and Cure Raja, but neither of the other two for some reason. So it was really frustrating to try to get, like, I only had one really good. Again, I think we talked about this before, but if I had to go back and do it all over again, I probably would have skipped out one of the classes and made a couple of white mages because they are so much better at doing the healing stuff than anybody else.
Yeah, and for me, everyone had everything. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
ended up working out. But in the early game, you've got to kind of manage all these specific healing spells, which means each of them takes up a different gambit slot. That has to be why they did it, so that you couldn't have a gambit that just healed everything. And then when you get Esuna in the later part of the game, I found that there are enough different status effects that are really devastating that aren't cured by Esuna that it still felt like I wasn't covered. Whereas in other games, they give you one or two spells that eventually will take care of everything, because juggling negative status effects is generally not the draw of these games. But this game is a lot more MMO styled, so I think they wanted to have these different feeling boss battles, and if you just invalidated negative status effects without equipment or something like that, it would take that off the table, I think.
Yeah. So two things that I'll just add very quickly. One, there are also different status effects that, confused me, because there are some that will just time out. There are some that will not time out. There are some that are cured by going to a save crystal. There are some that stay even after a save crystal. There's no kind of logic or rhyme or reason to these status effects, and
You
that
just need to know from a
constantly
guide.
frustrated me.
You just need to know from a guide, and there's some status effects that I'd never found a good way to cure them other than if one of my characters had, the maximum remedy, because remedies get better the more you unlock, remedy licenses.
There are parts on the license grid that you can unlock to make remedies better, which seems insane.
Yeah, and I would imagine in your version of the game, not everyone had access to all of them, I would guess, right?
Yes.
So, for me, every character eventually had the remedies that cured everything. But in your version of the game, there's going to be some characters that just are shit out of luck. And that's a bummer, because healing status effects, if one of your characters just gets hit by a quick attack chain and they were your only person who can heal negative status effects effectively, it's just a real fucking bummer. Then you have to get them back to life, and you have to hope that they don't get chained again before they can heal the status effects, and the characters that need to bring them back are suffering from status effects, so they might not even work properly. This game's a clusterfuck sometimes.
And this is compounded by the fact that I want to say a good 60% of the negative status effects just are different renditions of, your character is going to lose time. You're going to lose time. These characters are stuck. They won't be able to do their turns. There's immobile, there's disabled, there's stop, there's petrify, there's stone. All of these different status effects basically do the same thing.
Yeah, and there's disease, which is now your character's base health is 1, so then they just die instantly on contact.
Oh, man. Disease was one of the most frustrating ones for me, at least, because it wasn't very popular. I didn't see it inflicted very often before Pharos, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but then you really have to have it didn't fade away, as far as I know, and it stays around through Revive, too, so they can't die and be revived back.
Yeah.
So I wandered. I think I spent an entire 3-hour play session trying to get through the last little bit of Pharos just because of this one spell that I didn't have.
Yeah, so we will discuss this, but it's the status effects in this game are more numerous than in other games. They're
brutal
to cure,
as well. Yeah,
and they are maybe the most important parts of multiple boss battles. So one of them was Ahriman. Got through that, and once you get through that battle, you get to Arcadia, which is the seat of power of the evil empire that you're fighting.
Probably one of the best environments in the game.
Probably, it's one of the coolest areas, and you definitely see what a large thriving city looks like, because a lot of the times you're either moving through small towns. Rabanastre is kind of impressive, but it's under occupation, and it feels like it's a little bit more underdeveloped. It's a large city, but it's not technologically advanced in the way that Arcadia is.
Like how our first impressions of Arcades is old Arcades, where you see the slums of Arcades, so there's this kind of sense of class divide in this empire. And it's just very simple world building that I would take, because I feel like a lot of these dungeons lack true, honest world building. And so to have an environment that not only is beautiful to look at, I mean, the skyboxes in this game might be some of the best skyboxes I have ever seen, but it has a grounding within the world.
Totally. And I loved old Arcades. When you first go there, they mention that this is kind of the land for people who have nothing and who want to rise up, and for the people who used to be something in Arcades and have fallen down. And this is where they meet. This is basically the gutter where all of the unwanted people of Arcades fall. And as you talk to people there, you'll talk to some people who are poor and have always been poor and are trying very hard to get past the Imperial soldiers who let you into the heart of the city. And then there's people like senators and brokers that have fallen out of power and are just kind of languishing.
Now,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's a lot of great world building. I just wish what we did in the city of Arcades was better. Like, golly, man.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. So
I mean,
the mechanic here is that you need to talk to citizens.
I remember this. God damn it.
To get out of old Arcades.
But the worst one's coming up in Draclore.
Yeah, but in old Arcades, you basically talk to a few people, and it turns out that you've got one guy who is ruined by a broker, and a broker who used to ruin people. And then there's another guy who hid some money in his house. And then there's another person talking about how he found a bunch of money in someone's house. And you basically, in order to get past some guards, you need to tell one of the people who has been wronged that the person who wronged them is right there. And they will start a fight. And that fight gets you past the guards. And it sets up kind of the tone of what Arcadia is driven by, which is not money necessarily, but status and
conflict
via information.
Yeah.
Like, information dealing is the name of the game in Arcades. And once you get to the main city, you can't use their taxi system without spending like 100,000 gil or like 1,000,000 gil, because they won't let you on. The way that you get access is either pay a bunch of money, like an insurmountable amount of money, or you need chops, which are literally chops of wood that are embroidered with an Arcadian symbol that show that you've done some sort of community service to the city. It's kind of a socialist paradigm here.
Yeah, so I'll say this.
Currency.
The idea, like conceptually, I found it to be like, oh, good job. You've managed to use a puzzle or some sort of like puzzly thing in this game that's tied into the world, that makes logical sense, that makes sense within the world that it's taking place in. That said, I did not like doing this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, playing it. In theory, though, well, there's two things. There's the theoretical idea of what
the
this
social
city is about.
implications of this city, like it's how the class divide is real in the world. I totally agree with you.
That's very interesting.
I want to preface, getting these chops sucks.
Yeah, so let's discuss it in two phases. Let's start with the interesting part, and then we can talk about why it actually sucks in practice. So I think that it's a nice representation of what Arcadia was about before Vayne kind of sweeps in and before the changes that have led to the war that is occurring in FF12. Initially, this city and this country is meant to be a democracy. There's a Senate. There's a ruler, Lord Gramus, but he is beholden to a Senate. There's checks and balances, and the city is seemingly driven by a aristocracy, but the aristocracy also kind of has this soft power that's kind of represented by these chops. Like, money is important, but it is not as important as social status, represented by doing service for the city. And it's an interesting construct. It makes Arcadia as a place not be just a simple evil empire. Right?
Yeah,
you can
it also contextualizes why they've earned the reputation of an evil empire, because they want to show their status in everything that they do.
Yeah, but their status is, it's not just gained through military might or warfare or money or opulence. And it's kind of interesting because they show you how it's meant to be taken. Like, they mention that these chops are a sign of service, but the people who have them are generally, I don't know, like idle rich. And the people who are trying to get them are these, like, I guess barkers. They're like running around trying to find out information and tell it to people so that the people who are just awash in these chops will just give them a little bit of their status. So you can actually see walking through Arcades the two different classes of people. There's people who are dressed in fine clothes who are literally just milling about, and if you talk to them, they'll talk about their daily problems. And then there's people who are wearing like shorts, and some of them barely have shirts, and they are running around from person to person, and they are trying to gain information so that they can get access to these chops and move up in society.
But getting these chops basically is you playing matchmaker and talking to a bunch of people and pairing them up with the correct pairs.
Totally, and that part sucks. Like you need to read what these people tell you, and they'll basically give you a little hint on who would care about the information that they have, and then once you give the information to the person who cares about it and find the pairing, they'll give you a chop, and that if you get
chop.
You need
that chop can be turned into a sandalwood chop, which then allows you to use the fast travel system permanently.
Yeah, there's pine and sandalwood, and the sandalwood one also gets you access. So I think you need like 27 chops to get the sandalwood
I got them all.
one. I only did 9. I did the bare minimum. But once you get the sandalwood one, it gives you access to another part of the city that you don't have otherwise, which is interesting. Yeah. It's a cool conceit, and I like that they added this level of nuance to the evil empire.
So if you liked this puzzle, guess what? We're off to Draclore Laboratory, which has another environmental puzzle, and this one is even worse.
Oh, you mean the doors?
Flipping the blue and red switches so as that you can open doors.
Yeah.
I got so stuck on this one because it's like, golly, I didn't know, like, well, is this door blue? Does this door need blue, or does this door need red? Or
there are plenty of doors that can't even be opened at all, and it's spread across a lot of the different loading screens sometimes. This is really one of the walkthrough ones that I even went back after the third, like I got stuck a few times. I followed a walkthrough, and the walkthrough wasn't detailed enough to actually figure out where I was supposed to be going. I was super frustrated at this one.
I had that exact same problem. It's like, now make a U-turn and touch the doors console button. It's like, there's 2 doors. Which one do I pick? Because if I do the wrong one, then a giant swarm of soldiers will come up to me, and now I got to do it all over again.
Yeah, and the soldiers infinitely spawn. They just keep chasing you. There are some doors that will lead to switch rooms that you'll need to use to control the doors, but then there's some that just have enemies behind them, or a treasure chest, and some of them will just be empty rooms. So you're running around kind of trial and erroring your way through, and I really, as someone who's playing with like the official guidebook with maps and everything, I really appreciated that, because there's a section towards the end of Draclore where you're trying to kind of get to the boss, where there's an entire wing of the like environment that you don't need to go down. It turns out you can shortcut it all, and I would have totally thought that, you know, I need to go in this direction because the switch is probably over there. I don't know. It seems like there's a section of the map that I haven't explored. I clearly need to go there, when in fact you can like bypass an entire half of a floor and just go straight to the final boss.
Now, if there's one nice thing to say about Draclore Laboratory, it is basically the catalyst of the story finally getting its shit together and going into full swing. Because everything prior to Draclore Laboratory, it's like, we got to help Ash become the princess. Oh, Vaughn's talking about how sad he is he lost his brother. Oh, Bosch wants to prove his innocence. And it's very ticky-tacky kind of one-off character moments. But once you get into Draclore Laboratory, and just as a friendly reminder, Balthier drops 2 truth bombs in the previous environment prior to the Sochen Cave. 1, he says that he used to be a judge. And 2, his father is Dr. Sid, the evil maniacal scientist working with the Empire of Arcades in terms of finding manufactured nethicite.
And he's basically behind all of their military might. They've got this manufactured nethicite, or this nethicite, which is a magical stone full of mist that basically contains nuke level power.
Yes. Now, this leads us to Dr. Sid, and I want to say, I love Dr. Sid. This game has some really inconsistent voice acting, but god damn it, Dr. Sid's voice actor. That man was given some of the worst lines in this game, and he He worked his ass off. He was super hammy. Man, he was chewing through the scenery. He is the best character in this game, in my opinion, in terms of just freaking memorable and some of like these, like, there's some really bad one-liners that he's forced to do, and he just hams it up. It's great. I love Dr. Sid.
Yeah, he's not bad.
Yeah, I really enjoy his main motivation is that he wants humanity to have control of its own fate, because there's this... He just says that he wants to put fate into the hands of man at this point, and he wants these nethicite crystals so that man can choose their own destiny, which, you know, as a doctor, an evil doctor in a video game shouting it at you, it's great. It's perfect.
Now, if there's one thing to say, that whole like Dr. Sid's actually might be the good guy. He's that totally gets muddled in the last act of this game. Like, oh boy. But yeah, Dr. Sid just pulls out a Gatling gun. He's got double guns that have these long barrels on them. Oh, he's so good. He's so good.
It's a good fight.
Yeah, it's also a great fight. It's a great fight. It's cinematic. You have Redis jumping in to help you out. It's probably one of this battle in Draklor Laboratory is one of it strikes a nice balance between it's not super hard to where I get frustrated. It's also difficult enough to where I feel like I have to be on my toes, and it's cinematic. And there are these moments where you get little storytelling flares here and there. Yeah, I thought it was a great fight.
Yeah, and once you beat him, he basically says, I'm going to this ancient city, Giruvegan. I'll meet you there. And Redis, this sky pirate, jumps out, attacks Dr. Sid, and joins your squad.
Spooky ghost behind him.
Yes. Venat, or spelled Venat. You've seen Venat earlier in the game when you fought Judge Bergen. He shows up.
And Fran's sister.
Yes. So you see Venat a few different times across the game, and the spooky ghost is helping Dr. Sid. So all of the things are coming together. At this point, instead of going straight to Giruvegan, I decided I needed to grind. Up until this point, I was trying to use quickenings and cheese my way through, and I just couldn't anymore. So I went and found the slime room. Did y'all ever find the slime room?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and the Henny Mines, there's a section where you flip a switch, and it's a very small room, and if you flip the switch, 20 flans fall from the ceiling, and you can mow them down using Fyra, maybe 4 or 5 at a time. I ended up getting a 76 chain on them.
Yeah.
And that got me a bunch of money and a bunch of levels and enough assets that I could finally catch my characters up and play the game normally.
Now, here's the one thing I will say. The slime wood is great. There's a spot in the desert world that's great. There's the skeleton bridge in the first chapter of the game. Here's the problem that I have. There are all these great spots for you to power level your characters in the early to mid game, but once you get into the later stages of this game, once you get to about that level 30 to 40 area, there are no good, efficient ways to power level. It's basically, now you have to figure this out on your own. You have to go to these environments and not run away, and that is a bummer. Normally, there's the Power Peninsula or an area in the environment that has this constant flow of super powerful enemies that you can just power level or steal some cool stuff from. And Final Fantasy XII doesn't have that, and you really do feel that, Rorie said, I also had the thing where it's I was super high powerful leveled, and I took advantage of that for a lot of the game, and by the final 2 levels, I realized that, oh wow, I did not grapple. I'm missing a lot of stuff. I've gotten away on bad habits.
Yeah. One of the things I was running into at the end of the game when I was looking up the I had one black mage, but she had gambits for casting spells for enemies that were weak, but you really have to know that you have to have whatever the scanning spell is up. Also, the stuff knowing when enemies have protect on them and casting the spell on their positive status effects is probably just as important as buffing your own characters, which I really didn't do much of at all. So a lot of like little things that if I had taken the correct pace of the game or read a walkthrough for some of these boss fights would have given me a lot more ideas on how to get past some of the tougher parts. But the areas that we're coming up to also have non-standard kind of enemies, like a lot more flying enemies, which are tougher to hit with most weapons. So you really do. It's good that they make you start thinking about things as you go. I think they could have done a better job of that a lot earlier on in the game, like maybe making some bosses a little more fiddly in terms of like, if they have protect on them, you just can't hit them. You have to actually figure out how to deal with their buffs and everything like that.
Well, the weird thing is they do have those bosses. They do have these bosses where you have to play around with the gambits, but they're the hunts. They're the optional side content that you wouldn't think you need to do in order to like get this experience in terms of, oh, how do you handle like flying bosses? Oh, how do you handle elementally focused bosses? Oh, how do you deal with like a boss that gives you it like instills every possible negative buff in the game or debuff? Like all of those bosses are in the hunts, and if you avoid the hunts, which I did for the very early part of the game, like you feel totally caught with your pants down.
I just stopped doing hunts after a while. Like I thought they were fun, but then the difficulty curve hit a like asymptotic level pretty quickly early on in the hunt system, and I just found a lot of them to be fucking impossible. And I wasn't willing at that time to be. Obviously, they would have been a lot more doable had I been looking up walkthroughs. But I think we've talked about it before. But they're even tough to find when you know where they're supposed to be sometimes.
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass. You need to go. You need to start the hunt, you need to find the person who will give you the hunt. And then once you find them, you need to then go to where they kind of circle on a map or generally tell you where the enemy is on the map. And you
might have to kill every other enemy there for them to spawn, or you have to walk back until it's raining, or there's so many weird variables that are not at all clear in the game.
There's one that I completed to where you need to have one person in your party with less than 10% health, otherwise it will not spawn. And then immediately your first move after it spawns is to heal that person so they do not die.
Yeah, fun stuff.
I fought one where you could only get the enemy to spawn if your party was all women.
Yep.
So all of the different hunts I found...
And none of this is communicated to you. Like explicitly.
Very little of it. Yeah, it's the hunt descriptions are so vague. I mean, it's fun to have side content. I kind of prefer the hunt system to Final Fantasy X's like Monster Arena, which is just kind of like a box and a wall that you will run up and fight shit in. But it's neat. The idea of it is very neat. I don't think it was executed. A lot of the parts of this game really strike me as trying to sell a strategy guide back in 2004 whenever this came out.
Not only that, but like this game has so many MMORPG trappings that I almost wish that it was more like an MMORPG. Because if the hunts were just kind of like a traditional quest line, like in World of Warcraft, that would have been like way better, because it's so it obfuscates so much of the information, and it adds in so many extra steps. In like a traditional MMO, like doing a quest is a simple, bare bones process that I don't feel like I need to jump through 18 different goddamn hoops to do.
Yeah, I mean, if they just took a few of the lessons from the genre that they were clearly aping for this game, you would have quest givers with little exclamation points or literally anything over their head to distinguish them from the other NPCs, which many of the quest givers in this game are in cities surrounded by people. And so you need to talk to every person to figure out which one's the actual quest giver, and then they'll tell you, okay, go to this section of this dungeon, but wait, the dungeons are pretty big, and they're multiple sections. Sometimes they'll say, like, oh, go to this section, which you have to look up the name of the place in the dungeon, and they all have weird-ass names. Go to Phase 2, go to the Steps of the Beast, go to, some ridiculous name.
Yeah.
You go in there, and then you have to do something to actually cause the enemy to show up. If they had just put down, like, a marker and an arrow to show you where to go, just a little bit of hand-holding that MMOs by this time had integrated in just about every MMO at this point.
I think they're already looking forward to making a Final Fantasy XIV, which I mistook the fact that these are... I thought Final Fantasy XIV was in the world of Final Fantasy XII. It technically isn't, but the character designs are so similar, and like the feeling of these worlds are so similar that it definitely was the same team and like creative people I assume so. It definitely feels that way.
I ended up doing the research. It's like, where is this game? It's set in Final Fantasy Tactics, and it's part of a complicated timeline. So we get to Final Fantasy XII if you succeed, or like you get the good ending, and then Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is a different timeline. You know, Japanese timelines in their video games. What are you going to do?
Crazy.
But yeah, this is in the Tactics universe. It's a prequel. Now, just to ducktail into the previous conversation, all of these problems are compounded by the fact that Final Fantasy XII may well have some of the so much of this game is side content.
Yeah.
Like, there are entire environments, there are entire levels, there are parts of the world where you can just totally not go there the entire playthrough if you just mainline the story.
Totally. And there's some sections that I found I gained a lot more appreciation for the environments and the maps when I started walking through for grinding purposes. Like when I was in Dalmasca Wester Sand, there's actually a secret entrance to some caverns where there's a secret Esper in there. And you can get into those caverns from the Wester Sand or from Giza, the Giza Plains.
Yeah.
And or the Osmone Plains. It's one of those plains, and they're all connected by like different sections of the maps of those respective areas because they're all in kind of the same general layout of the world map. They're actually connected as well through some doorways here and there. And then there's a subterranean cavern system that also connects them and shows that they're all actually adjacent. And it makes the world feel much more integrated than kind of jumping around something like Final Fantasy X, where you're kind of just jumping from environment to environment to environment, and unless you kind of follow where you are on the world map, some of these sections might feel like they're completely different worlds from each other.
Yeah. It's a neat little system. If you wander into an Esper when you're not ready for it, or a hunt. I mean, I think I only did the Espers that were part of the main storyline. Like, I didn't chase down any of the other ones, because I never really did any summoning. I think the problem I had with some of my characters are, I think some of them had more stuff locked off behind Esper zones on their thing.
In our version of the game, there are certain parts of the license grid that are only accessible if you link a summon to a character.
Yeah, which I was not. The last two I got, I didn't bother to look at the license board for them, because you get two in pretty quick succession by the end of the game. Right before the end of the game. Which,
just highlights this game's pacing problems, the fact that there are two very useful summons that just happen at the last part of the game.
Yeah, literally the second to last boss battle in some cases. So I definitely agree, and the Espers did not, from the ones that you get early on, it's not clear that they would be useful, because Belias is immediately outclassed, and Mateus is pretty useful in the early parts of the game. But other than somewhat useful, more than Belias.
No, you said Belias, and we're going to talk about Belias's most useful thing coming up.
Yes, very shortly.
It feels like they really, someone's always kind of taken over your entire party out of the thing, but here it feels super weird to be able to, like, run around and have them be acting with you, but not really part of your rest of your party kind of vanishes. Having the control, I never thought it worked particularly well.
No,
they don't control well, and they don't feel like I don't feel like the game does enough to talk about what they are or what they represent in the world. I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics does, but not here.
Yeah, you need to go into after you've fought an Esper, you can go into your bestiary and read about them. I did it just to see what it said, and it turns out that they are like 13 deities that were dark deities, and they were mirrored light deities, and they were created by gods, and then they turned against them and were cast down, and that all the ones that joined you are the ones who were cast down, and the good ones are still up in heaven or some such nonsense.
Blah, blah, blah.
I didn't even notice all of the Espers are supposed to be different astrological signs.
Yeah, you see some of that sometimes in the symbology for summoning some of this stuff. I think 14 does a little bit of that same stuff as well.
Yeah, they love getting into other... Like, Final Fantasy games love just picking and choosing different religious and mythological symbols and just throwing them all around. This one, they went with the zodiac symbols and created new creatures kind of based on the symbols. So like Belias, I forget which one Belias is. I know Mateus is Pisces because it's a fish. Hashmal, who we see a little bit later, is Leo, so he looks like a lion. And then there's a secret 13th one too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I tried to do most of but eventually, yeah, I did one of the optional. I got stuck on one of the optional espers. I think it was Cuculain, who you have to fight in a vat of acid. So no matter what you do, your health is perpetually decreasing. So I felt like, well, this is messed up. I got some of them. I like for example, I got Zalera, the Death Seraph, and I think I got a couple of them.
He's real powerful.
Zalera breaks the game. It's kind of weird. Like, he's one of the most useless characters in terms of helping out your license grid, but he just casts death, and unless the character has immunity to death, Zalera just can one-shot everything in the game. You don't get any XP, but it was great having this summon that I could use on bosses that didn't have an immunity to death, that I could just be done.
Yeah, and I found that most of the main storyline summons were borderline useless because my characters were not so hefty that if they summoned an Esper, they would be able to survive long enough for the Esper to do anything useful. And early game Espers they melt to late game enemies, so they can't even do anything. Like, either my character would be able to survive and the Esper wouldn't, or the Esper would be able to survive and my character wouldn't. It's a cool idea for a system, but I didn't find them to be especially useful.
It's really weird how, just looking back over the history of Final Fantasy, like, I think this game does them pretty poorly. I don't remember 13 at all. 15 was just completely random. Like, they would show up when they wanted to. It feels like they're getting worse and worse in terms of how they implement these summons into these games, which might be kind of irrelevant because they haven't announced 16 yet. It's actually been a really, really long time since 15 came out.
13 might have one of my least favorite summonings. Like, there was a monster inside you all along, and then you awakened it when you had your emotions take over your mind, and now you can summon Alexander.
I honestly completely forget the 13 summoning system, along with a lot of the rest of that game.
You basically save up summon juice like in 12 for the mist charges, and then when you use the summon, it becomes an action adventure game temporarily. Like, you're controlling the summon by just picking attacks, but it's no longer a the weird combat system that 13 uses. Instead, it's just like press X to shoot bullets.
It's a quick time event
something.
for some of them too. Yeah.
It's quick time events until you charge up enough attacks to use super move. But it heals everyone. That's what
it's one of the things that was lost. Like, I feel like was lost in translation when this franchise moved from 2D to 3D, is like the need for summoning, or like summons in general. There's another thing that we'll talk about later, but yeah, some things just kind of work better with just 2 dimensions. Yeah, but just to highlight, okay, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say on the summon subject that when you think about it, the early summons in games like 3, 4, and 5, I think Summoner was introduced as a job in 3. But
it's either 4 or 3. I remember who's the girl in Final Fantasy? Rydia, yeah.
Rydia's in 4, and she's definitely the canonical summoner. But I think Summoner might have been a job in 3 because that was the earliest version of the job system. But in those games, it used the summons as a way to show off these kind of cooler sprites that they had created, and they would generally have nicer effects than some of the other stuff in the game. So it was splashy. Then come time for 7, 8, and 9, the summons were graphically just so impressive, and they looked like nothing else that could be done on those consoles. Like, there weren't, outside of cutscenes, like pre-rendered cutscenes, there wasn't much in engine that looked as impressive as a Final Fantasy game summon animation. And that could, I could show people a summon animation, and they would be pretty blown away just by what was happening on a PlayStation. But then when you get to 10, 11,
no, I think
12.
10 I think I prefer the route of 10 and 9 because I like it when it's a job and only 1 or 2 characters can do it. With 10's case, only Yuna can summon, and there is a very specific reason why. In 9, it's Princess and Horn Girl.
It's Ico and Garnet that can summon. But they're in 7, 8, 9, summons are just attacks, and they're just especially flashy looking attacks. 10, they are similar to 12 actually. It replaces your whole party with a extra character that's basically going to take over for you for a short amount of time. And they're super powerful. And then as you keep going, like 13, it's quick time events. It changes the whole combat system with quick time events, and it looks flashy, but it's not especially important. And then by 15, it sounds like it looks visually flashy, but it's like random, almost like Odin in Final Fantasy VIII, where he'll just kind of show up and do stuff occasionally.
Yeah, from my recollection, I played 15 last year, and I think it was pretty similar to that. They look amazingly cool when they do show up, and they kind of pop up in story-relevant moments, but after that, there's no real control as far as I recall. They just kind of have this preset. Like, if you get hit a lot, or you're like on the verge of death, you might get Ramuh show up and do some lightning, but it's basically out of your hands entirely, from what I recall. So 12 is just like, it just doesn't feel like it's worth fooling around with them.
I think that as we've gone further and further from the origins of the Final Fantasy series, summons used to be the technological showpieces of these games, and that used to be what Final Fantasy its big selling point was, just that it was visually so much more impressive than everything else, and that's just no longer the case. And so having these set pieces that show off the technical excellence of your game, they're not as necessary, and it's in fact distracting. These tend to have these animations, like summons tend to have animations that dominate. It takes a lot of time. You can't exit out of it, and it's all ultimately just to do slightly more damage than your regular attacks. So I think it almost feels like
it would have been cool to have a system where it kind of like have more impact on the like I would have almost preferred to see something like where you're pairing up your characters with these, like when you actually put this on your skill grid or whatever, you get some kind of like passive buffs to your character. Like if you have a good damage dealing, so you can you cast the spells that they can cast if you wouldn't normally be able to do that kind of stuff in the regular. I almost, rather than summoning them, just have them be kind of like a side character or something like that. That gives you more abilities, because the way it's implemented right now doesn't really.
In 12, they don't even feel like characters. They just feel like items that you gain and then can use. I mean, I was able to get, I forget which one, but when Vaughn was my knight, and when I used a summon for him, he was now able to cast, like, white magic, and so I had, like, an alternate healer. That's kind of cool, but, like, I wish that there was more to it than just put that shit on a license board and hope for the best. And then also there are some times where, like, like with some of the espers, it's like, is this going to unlock this part of the license grid, or is it just nothing's going to unlock, and this is just here for, shits and giggles? It's like some espers you can accidentally unlock it on the wrong license grid, and now you have nothing to show for it. And
except the summon, who's useless.
Useless.
Super annoying.
Yeah, so that's kind of it for the summon system. Like, the espers are cool to look at. I like battles with them because they're pretty impressive when you're fighting against them, but I wish that they were more useful when you actually summon them, because we're about to run into a bunch.
But we're with the pirates, where it's like One Piece anime style pirates.
What did you think about Elsa's design?
She wears her panties on top of her butt-hugging short shorts.
She wears a thong on the outside.
Were we supposed to feel anything with those characters? Because there's Gruff Pirate Guy, there's her, and then there's the little golem thing, or like the little goblin guy. That reminds me of what's his name from Final Fantasy X too. Like they have they have a weird amount of like characterization, or amount of time that the game gives them to just talk and chat, but like they don't even have that Greek chorus effect of like summarizing important information that I'm confused by.
Yeah, the game seems to think they're more important than I ever felt they were. They sometimes get cutscenes where they are talking to each other, like they are Redis's pirate crew, but I didn't find them to move the plot along very much. The things they were saying weren't especially interesting, and I was fine to leave them the fuck behind when we left.
Now, you want to talk about like storytelling malfeasance in this game? Like Redis talks about, you eventually find out that Redis was a judge who worked with Dr. Sid and awakened some sort of manufactured nethicite, and it destroyed the city of Nabu D. You don't ever go to the city of Nabu D in the main story. It's a part of a side quest that you only go to if you do the hunts or the medallion quest line.
Is that what the Deadlands you told me about is?
Yes.
So Nabu D...
the actual charred remains of the city that Redis destroyed when he did an experiment with Dr. Sid. And it's great. There's even a cutscene there when you go there, and you find out that there's some sort of evil that's been awakened, that the shrine of Nabu D was responsible for putting into a deep slumber. Like, there's an incredible amount of storytelling, and it's totally optional. You don't need to go there. In fact, the game throws it in an uphand corner of the environment where it's actually a pain in the ass to go to. It's just insane that it's there, and it's not required.
That's especially malpractice because they mention Nabu Dis all the time in the story that, oh, there was this giant tragedy, and I didn't know where it was. I didn't know why I should care about it. I didn't know what happened there. And then when Redis reveals, like, hey, it was this city, and I essentially nuked it off the face of the earth, and that's why Arcadia is to be feared, that gave a lot of relevance to it. And if I had walked through that city before he said that, it would have contextualized things in a nice way.
You should have done well, Gino. You can go back and do the 3 medallions quest line.
No, I'm good. So at this point, we are told to go to the ancient city of Gyruvagan, which
means we have to go through the Feywood, and then
to go through the Feywood.
I'll say this: I am so glad that we're done with dilapidated, rundown temple. Because we got 5 more levels that are exactly like that coming up. But I will say, though, I'm so happy that we're out of the deserts because the variety in the late game of the environments is far better than the early game. You spend so much time looking at deserts and sands and dunes, and it's great that they put in all the visual variety at the end of the game. Not.
Yeah, it was certainly a choice. So you go through the Feywood, which is... It's woods. There's magics there. There's a lot of enemies that hit you with negative status effects.
Fucking traps in the area that we're coming through, and I never found the trap system to be worth. Like, I thought it was totally pointless. You either have Libra or you don't. But even then, the traps by half the time you would try to avoid them, but one of your party members would walk right through it. Which is fucking annoying.
The solution is to cast float so that you can fly over them, but at no point the game tells you that. And also, it's like, what put these traps here? I wish that there was like some sort of detect traps or some sort of mechanic like in Pathfinder and D&D where you can actually use a character to like disarm them or permanently disarm them. I'm kind of thinking...
And you never know if they're going to fucking wipe out 2 of your party members, or there'll be, like, a beneficial trap that heals everybody. Like, why? Who would ever lay a beneficial trap in the middle of a fucking forest? And the really frustrating ones are the ones that have, treasure chests inside them, so you have to trigger the trap in order to get whatever's in there, which could be a Knot of Rust, or it could be the most important spell in the game. You never know.
I had it be to where one of the traps cast Confuse on my parties, and literally as a result, all my characters are running around, running into other traps, and then I had a total party kill, TPK, after they ran through literally every single mine in the fucking level after getting Confuse cast on them.
Confuse is a huge buzzkill when it happens.
It's a fucking bummer. I did find that the treasure chests that were in traps, I generally could walk right up to the edge of the trap, not trigger it, and still access the chest.
But it's fiddly. And then you have to face the chest in the right direction because you can't just walk.
Oh, man.
Oh, my God. Gino, is this a problem in vanilla Final Fantasy XII? Because in the Zodiac edition, it's really fiddly that you need to face the chest or the item the exact right direction that it's designed for you to accept. Now we have,
and then you have a character who like starts automatically casting a spell or a buff, and they turn around. Oh my God!
You want to talk about Pharos and like those dark orbs? I lost so many of those dark orbs because Fran was my main character when I was going through the level, and she's constantly casting haste as I'm trying to pick up this story critical item.
Yep, super annoying.
That happens, and you can't pick up items when you're fleeing, which is also annoying because that's what will allow your characters to move and not trigger their macros and not auto attack. But the game's just like, nah, if you're fleeing, you don't get to open doors. You got to take your weapons out to open a door or pick up a treasure chest. Yeah, it's frustrating. So at the end of the Feywood, You fight Rafflesia, some large flower that does a bunch of negative status effect bullshit. I didn't find it to be especially difficult.
But
No,
this is the point. Yeah, it's not a hard one, but this is the point where the bosses basically start using status effects. More so, like the big threat is not their attacks, it's how their status effects will impact you. For example, Rafflesia can cast Confuse. And yeah, you can get like the Ninshinji belts, or you can prevent sleep, or you can get the bowline. Like there are items that can circumnavigate it. But every boss has like 3 to 4 status effects, and your items can only address maybe 2. And so you're always
each character
vulnerable.
can only equip one accessory, and each accessory, except the ribbon, will only prevent one status effect. So unless you have at least 3 of each accessory that is relevant, you're never going to have a party that's resistant to all of the status effects that your opponents are throwing at you.
Yeah,
You need to just constantly be
and they
cycling
have
through them.
like most of them will have at least 2. So the strategy is prepare 2 of your characters for one and the other for the other. But like it's still, and you always lose time when you get a status effect cast on you. It's like, ah, shit, now I'm going to waste like 2 or 3 turns or whatever this game considers a turn trying to cast Esuna or the item or the specific spell that you need to do this.
Yeah, or you end up with issues where your characters, in your version of the game, I'm sure you don't have access to all of the accessories for all of your characters. I could at least unlock every accessory for every character if I needed to, so I could just swap around the items that I need. But it's a pain.
And then you go into the misty part of the Feywood where I think the game tried to do a puzzle, but then it doesn't disable your map, so you can just put in the overlay of the map and just figure it out your own without interacting with those temples.
Really? I thought you had to use the temples.
No, you can just, maybe it's in our version, but you always can hit tab to bring up the map on the screen.
I mean, I knew about the map. I thought you had to use the temples to actually unlock the areas that you need.
I forget. Maybe you do, but like, it's a weird puzzle. It's there. I don't know why it needs. I guess it makes sense because there's mist, and you know, I guess it makes sense in the environment that it's mist and it's trying to guide you and lead you through the way. But it's so ho-hum that I don't feel like it. Now, the one that I think is total bullshit is when you get to the end of the Feywood and you encounter a door. You encounter a door. Yes. At the edge of reason. God, these names for these levels sometimes. They just get me. But you go up to it and it says like some sort of cryptic message, and it's like, this is the Summoner's Gate, like the Gigas Gate. Summon the power, or like the gate's powers is yours to claim. And it's like, well, what do I do? Is there something that... and so, of course, obviously, I thought, oh, man, there must be a key. I have to go around trying to find a key to open this gate. Nope.
Use keys to open doors.
Yes. Nope, not this time. This time, you have to summon Bellius.
This time, the keys were the friends we made along the way.
And there's nothing in that little puzzle to suggest that you're going to need to summon a very specific... Like, he's not even the strongest fucking summon you got at this point. So, why Bellius? I don't know.
And why not just say Bellius? Like, put it in the actual goddamn text of the thing.
Put it in the text that this is the Gate of Bellius, not Gigas. Who's Gigas?
Yeah. Look, he's Bellius the Gigas, but they don't say the subtitles. Like, their official titles are not shown after you get them the first time. So if you've been playing this game for roughly 40 hours, which you might you probably have, you might have forgotten that he's Bellius the Gigas, because in all menus it will just say Bellius from here on out. It's a pain in the ass, but if you're reading a guide, which it seems like most people who play this game use a guide because it's so inscrutable, it's not too bad, because you just basically summon it and then the gate opens for you.
But it's just an example of the game forcing your hand to use a guide rather than to try and figure it out organically, because it doesn't set you up for success. It doesn't even give you a tell in the environment. Like, had the level been like coded in red, and it's like, oh man, I can think of the summon that is covered in fire or red, or there's symbols. Like, these summons have symbols. These summons have zodiac stuff on them. Like, they're they coincide with a zodiac symbol. Put that on the door.
Yeah, I mean,
I definitely had to look up a guide for this one. I did not figure it
it's
out.
not great.
Naturally, I'm not sure who really could have.
Yeah. So you keep going. You go to Giruvegan, which is one of the coolest environments, I think, in the game.
The coolest, at least before you have to start playing it. But yes, it's one of the most beautiful environments in the level. And, you know, I always complain about how, you know, this game keeps providing us these great, beautiful environments, and it doesn't take the time to, like, create the environment, make the environment a character. And in the case of Giruvegan, there's one more coming up. It feels like a character. It feels like it has a history, and there are cutscenes, there are conversations with the characters that build this environment up as being a legendary place and how it relates to the greater world.
Yeah, it's this big lost city with ruins and bridges over this large stretch of water. There's mist everywhere.
It looks nothing like the previously encountered environments.
Yeah, and it's all tied together by these waystones, these teleport stones. It feels like the Tomb of Wraithwall in some ways. Basically, all the places that relate to the magical crystals have a sort of similar feel. And this one, I think, is probably the best looking of all of them. You immediately are met by Daedalus, this large
genie
monster thing with a big machete looking. It looks like an iron giant from Final Fantasy.
Well, it has no head. In traditional Hindi, or like kind of like that Tales of Arabian, genies actually don't have heads. I believe so.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's creepy.
This is a boss you can hilariously beat by casting Reflect on yourself and having it do the work for you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he's weak to his own magic.
I just had him. I just hit him a few times and then used quickenings on him.
Yeah, I think I don't recall it being very difficult. A lot of the bosses are either one shot or you really need to make a huge amount of preparation and figure out what the fuck you're doing ahead of time, and it takes an hour to get through them because you just like have to look up a guide.
Yes.
So kind of the two categories.
This leads us to the water steps, and if you want to talk about like there are two parts in this game that literally. One broke me, and one almost broke me. And the water steps almost broke me because everything in this environment has like virtually every status effect at its disposal. It's endless. There's no way for you to stop the random encounter, or not random encounters, but like they keep spawning. They cast Doom. They cast Silence. They cast Stop. Like, boy, oh boy. This might have been like one of my least favorite levels to play, sheerly because of difficulty. Like,
yeah, I almost lost 2 hours because I was just running through these enemies easily. Most of them were fine. Like behemoths were fine. The giant golems, the things that gave me 2 LP for killing and the most experience for killing, I had no problems with because they didn't use negative status effects.
Right. Then you got the Vivians and the Ozies and the Reapers.
I ran into a thing that looked like a Marlboro. And
it was wearing a cute little purple crown.
Yeah, it was an adorable little crown. And then it used one of its breath attacks, and it hit all 3 of my characters with literally every negative status effect in the game.
Yeah.
Sleep, stone, disable, disease, like everything. And then my characters just could not function, and I almost died. Like, I lost multiple characters. I had to run away from everything. I managed to barely recover everyone. And then I just made a beeline for the exit and didn't fuck around with anything ever again.
To compound this problem further, there is no save crystal in this environment. There are 3 parts to this environment, and there is no save crystal. There's one before, and there's one after.
Yeah, and this section is full of, like we said, enemies that if it touches you once with one of its negative status effects, your character is useless. And many
like
of the
I
status
said,
effects it hits you with aren't even curable.
Curable, and they're sometimes duplicates of the same concept, which is you're stuck or you lose time.
Yeah, it's a bummer. And I found that this section was the closest I came to just like dropping the game. Thankfully, I didn't get hit with that again, but I almost lost like a ton of progress. And I was like actually grinding. I was trying to get items and get experience, and then I just ran into one enemy that hit me with a negative status effect, and then oops. All of my character's strength counted for nothing because I got hit with a cloud of bad breath. At the end of this, you fight Tyrant, which is another...
I want to also add, like, trying to find invisible steps in the environment that blend into the dark, like, kind of filter on this filtered background was such a pain. You have to create those green steps that lead downward into the lower area of the environment. And we haven't talked about this enemy type, but if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking that you want to play Final Fantasy XII, and you see a giant ball of pure energy walking around the environment, run away.
Yeah,
man. Entites, yep. The Daikon Entites, those balls of pure energy that randomly will spawn in the environment, and they will wreck you.
Luckily, they're neutral for the most part, but if you have a gambit set up that auto attacks anything you come near, you will hit. There are some of those floating around really early on in the game too, and they are really tough.
Yeah, they're all elementals, and those elementals, if you cast spells near them, they will aggro.
Yep. They will wipe your party pretty quick. It
is a TPK. It's a total party kill.
I think I beat one at some point late in the game, but for the most part, when you see them, you're just supposed to run, which is not really cool mechanic, I guess. I mean, they're kind of as a, if you wander a little bit too close to them, you'll just die, but never been my most favorite RPG kind of mechanic.
Yeah, it's fine when it's a super enemy in an area that you're otherwise walking through. It's quite another when it's in a dungeon that you need to get through for story progress. After you get through the water steps, you fight Tyrant, which is a giant dragon. I found that to be fairly easy. He was a pretty simple boss.
He doesn't do any evil status effects, and so he feels like an pro. I just feel like I wish that the bosses were more clearly connected with the environments. It's like, oh, hey, there's an evil dragon that shows up. Okay.
Yeah, I think, Rorie, you hit it on the head. There's half of the bosses who you just fight like conventional enemies, and they are cake. And then there's the other half where you have to look up a guide because they do one crazy bullshit thing, and they require intense pre-battle planning. Luckily, strategy.
For the most part, I think most of them fell into the first category for me. Like, I was pretty high level by the end of the game, and I could just kind of walk in and figure it out as things were going on if I wasn't just popping through really quick. But there are some specific attacks that are very, very tough to deal with unless you know what's going on ahead of time, and also make sure you have the spell, which one boss in particular, I think I'll tell the experience when we get there. But yeah, it's very easy to miss critical parts of this game, like critical parts of the gameplay, spells, items. It's easy to just walk right past. I think we probably already did mention this a little bit, but it's my biggest frustration with this game. It's like, holy shit, I need this one spell to get rid of this one status effect. I missed it when I walked by it 5 hours ago, so now I have to go back and find it. I had to leave the top of a dungeon and rerun a lot of it to get back to the boss that I was stuck on. So I was just, man.
We'll be getting there. I think it's like the next dungeon.
Oh, yeah. The Great Crystal?
Well, we go to the Great Crystal where you need to teleport around, and that one's kind of bullshit. I had a guide, so I was able to get around pretty easily. But if you don't, you run into a bunch of enemies that like cast death.
It's probably one of the worst cases of, I don't know where I am, and this is going to take forever. I'm just going to look it up. Yeah. But just to go over, like, even then, like, the Great Crystal is one of those environments that has the best gear in the entire game. Like, I looked it up as, like, here's the optional side quests. Like, every class's best item, especially in the Zodiac edition, every class's best spell is in that environment when you want to go there a second time. The problem is there's no warp crystal, so you actually have to go through the entire water steps a second go. And so
awesome.
You have to go through the entire water steps to get to the Great Crystal, and then you have to interact with the Great Crystal's like gate system, which is no easy task, but like that's where you get Excalibur, that's where you get Ultima, or the Ultima sword.
Oh man, I'm looking up the optional Esper Ultima who's in this area, and just the amount of steps to go through to get to her and finally beat
insane.
her. This is like a whole separate page.
It's like 10 or 12 pages, like just to figure out how to get to Ultima. And then, like, if you want to do Zodiac, the precept of time, like, oh my god, it's crazy because like those characters they're built into the world far better than some of the bosses we actually fight in the game. Like they have these
way
legends.
More interesting than Tyrant.
They have these legends to them. They have like stories to them. Like they feel connected to the world and grounded into the world far more than anybody. Like I'm looking at the guide for Zodiac Keeper of the Precepts, and it's like literally 10 pages. Just like half of it is figuring out how to get to the encounter, and then the other half is this is how you beat it without dying within the first 5 moves. It's like I have no interest. I'm done. I'm glad that I am done, and I don't. These levels also, and there's more than one that disable your map, are such a pain in the ass.
Yeah, really annoying.
But you fight Shem Hazai or Hazai.
Yeah, at the bottom you fight Shem Hazai, the Whisperer.
Yes, another Esper.
She is Taurus. She's the I think.
Also, I want to say,
not
like,
Taurus,
I've said some
Capricorn.
mean things on this podcast about, like, the 3D crazy boss design in the 3D Final Fantasy games. I think that Final Fantasy XII might be one of the better ones. Like, the Espers are just beautiful to look at.
They are really cool looking.
I actually was wrong. Shem Hazai is Sagittarius because she's a lady and a horse. And
Yeah,
she shoots,
but like
she has
some of the
bows.
best like 3D boss designs in this game, and I just wish that they weren't hidden beneath like mountains of bullcrap to get to them.
Yeah, I agree. This
She
battle wasn't especially bad, except she sometimes casts
silence
and
on all
disease.
parties, yeah, and disease.
But her HP is pretty low, and she doesn't deal a ton of damage, which is useful.
Now, this is when, like I said, once you beat this boss and the previous bosses, whenever you beat a main boss in a dungeon, it is story time. And if there's one negative thing to say about this game, it is that there is virtually no storytelling done in between levels. They do a lot of the storytelling to, like, you know, front load the vocabulary, front load the concepts, and then they backload, or it's very there's a lot at the end. It's a very top heavy storytelling, and I wish that there were just like maybe some occasional conversations as we get to these like halfway points or quarter way points within the level, because it's like you go for 2 hours with no storytelling, no interactions between the characters, and the consequence is that this game is very heavily reliant on, and I admit that they're very good cutscenes, but like 10 to 15 minute cutscenes in between levels.
Yeah, and you can't. Well, at least you can pause it here, because I know in 14 you cannot pause any cutscene, which is not terrible to understand because it is always online. But there are some like single player quest cutscenes that you can't skip in. You can't even pause them in 14. You can skip them, but you can't pause them. But there are some unskippable cutscenes too, especially in a raid, one of the last raids, where you have to sit there for like at least 5 or 6 minutes just waiting for this boss to pop, because it doesn't pop up until the cutscene's done for everybody, which is unskippable. So they still have a lot to learn about this stuff. But man, yeah, it's a lot of. At least at the end of the game, I felt like the story was not as dense early on. We weren't learning so much about what's going on as the character motivations and stuff like that. So it got a little more loose.
Yeah,
which is nice.
Now, the one thing that I will say of all of this, and we mentioned this in the previous episodes, is like the big problem with Final Fantasy XII in terms of its story is that it has too many plot threads that are active at the same time. Some of them are great, some of them are bad, but the fact that it's trying to do this juggling act of like, here are these one-off character moments, here is this political intrigue, here's this quest for vengeance, like all of these different storylines, it struggles to balance that or do this juggling act.
Yeah,
I would say by far what I think is the least successful or the least enjoyable plot line is everything involving the Arcadia. I think it's my least favorite part of the story. It's super confusing. These characters just speak mountains upon mountains of proper nouns. And the worst case is when you beat Shem Hazai and Ash has a conversation with the Arcadia. So, Gino, could you summarize what this conversation was? Because I don't entirely understand what it was.
Yes, so the Arcadia, they are a race of basically deities.
So there's like 2 or
world.
3 different levels of gods in this world, and humans are just chilling in like the middle ground. Like you have the Espers, you've got these deities.
So
got,
the Arcadia made the Espers. So the Arcadia are ageless.
Where did you find this information?
I looked it up when I started reading about the Espers in the Bestiary. I wanted to get a better explanation, so I just went to a wiki, an FF12 wiki, and it basically The situation is the Acuria are...
I can't preface enough, this will be the last interruption, but I can't preface enough that the game doesn't actually tell you any of this in the main story. This is something
I had to look up. So when I looked it up, it turns out that the Acuria are a race of ageless creatures, that immortal creatures who have been pulling the strings of history for the time immemorial, basically. They gave the Dynast King, the Ash's ancestor, the access to Nethicite. They've been using these crystals to basically shape the course of mortal history forever in Ivalice. And they select Ash to be the person who sets history back in their control, because one of the Acuria, Vana, the character who's been helping Cid and helping Vayne and helping Arcadia, has decided that it's time for her kind to not have control, or his kind. I don't know if Vana has a gender, but Vana decides that his or her race has had control of history for too long. They're ageless, they're detached, and instead the mortals should have control. So she joins Cid and Vayne, teaches them how to make manufactured Nethicite in order to kind of wrest control from the Acuria. And the Acuria, in response, have called Ash via Razzler, all of Razzler's ghosts, and all the times when you've met an obstacle and then Razzler's ghost would walk through it and then the obstacle would just vanish mysteriously. It turns out that Razzler's ghost was a way to draw Ash to Giruvegan and eventually to her destiny, to claim some stones that they say, you can use them. We're going to give you a new sword that's going to be able to cut this crystal called the Sun Crystal, which is this gigantic crystal made entirely of Nethicite that even a few fragments of it would be enough to level a city. And so we're going to give you a new sword. Your ancestor had this sword for cutting. We're going to give you a new one. It's the Oath Blade, because we're making a new pact between humans and the Acuria, and you're going to listen to us, and in return, we're going to give you the power to get vengeance for what has been done to your country.
Now, I think that the good news of this, yes, no, absolutely not. Now, I think the one good thing to pull from this is that it kind of contextualizes Cid in a weird, odd way, and it kind of contextualizes the actions of Vayne in a weird, odd way. Like, they are people who want to just say, man, we found out that it's all a masquerade. It's all a joke. We're all being controlled by these gods. We want to set things right. We want to put destiny in the hands of humanity. The problem is that they're mustache-twirling villains that cackle whenever they're in front of the main characters. If they had just been driven characters that want to give us our destiny, and that's the reason why the Empire is doing everything that it's doing, I feel like the story would have been far more impactful. But I love Dr. Cid and his hammy bullshit so much that I don't know if I really want that.
Yeah, it's odd because their stated goal to restore humanity, to give humanity some control of their own fate, to decide that we don't want to be puppets controlled by the Acuria, it's actually, they're the good guys in the story, Cid and Vayne. The problem is Cid and Vayne specifically want to use that freedom to dominate the entire world. So their larger goal, I guess their smaller goal of freeing humanity from the hands of these ageless, nameless, unaccountable deities is a good goal, but that's kind of only a step on their way to world domination. It's the world domination that's the problem. If they could just stop at freeing humanity from the hands of these just indifferent creatures that only ever call on humans in order to ensure that the status quo is maintained, that'd be fine. But unfortunately, they're also villains.
Yeah, and if the game had introduced these Acuria earlier and they had presented themselves, and then like their nefarious kind of like true intentions had revealed themselves earlier in the game, I would have probably felt better about that. It's like, oh shit, there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better way, Gino. Like,
yeah, but instead you get the sense that Vayne and Cid are actually working towards a larger good cause. And the Acuria are these creatures that they won't even answer questions. They're just like, it's not for us to explain to you, dum-dum, our plans. We are beyond you. And when they send you to go to the Fawn Lighthouse, which is where the Suncrest is, they don't even tell you where it is. They say just like go to this lighthouse on a far off shore, and that's where it is. Because we're not going to tell you shit. We're just telling you, do this for us. You figure it out.
If I recall, this was really complicated to find. Like, I think it's one of those ones where you have to find it on the map and walk away to get there, but it's not really clear at all where you're supposed to go.
So yes.
In a bit, like, the way that you figure this out is after you leave this environment, you got a new sword, you go back to Balfenheim, where Redis and his squad are.
You need to talk to one of Redis's bodyguards in front of his fucking palace.
Yeah, then he lets you in. And once you talk to him, he says, I sent some ships around to scout because I figured Dr. Sid was going to screw you guys, and if he does that, we need a second plan. And he basically scouts out this place called the Fawn Lighthouse in the Ridorana Cataract. These names, man, they're just...
No, it's the Ridorana Cataract on the Naldoan Sea.
Oh, not the Fawn Lighthouse, the Pharos Lighthouse.
No. So it's at the Naldoan Sea by the Ridorana Cataract, and you will find the Pharos Lighthouse.
Fuck.
And you have to get there by using the aerodomes.
Yeah, you need to take an airplane from the airport, and then you can go to the big tower that's on an island by the edge of the world. Like, it's almost literally the edge of the world. There's a big waterfall that just drops off forever.
So
it's pretty.
Are you saying Final Fantasy XII is a flat earther? This game's flat Earth?
It seems to be. It's basically at World's End, the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It's basically that. Except sky pirates instead of pirate pirates.
The one good thing, though, although it's immediately disappointing, is that Redis joins your party, and so you have that guest slot in there. The problem is that Redis is probably the worst guest in the game.
Yeah, he's really weak. He's cool. I like the character a lot, but he had like half the health of anybody else in my party.
He's a great character. He's a great character, but one, he has like half the health of your party members. Two, he doesn't have any of his gambits set up to like heal people. Three,
he doesn't have any healing abilities. He just attacks.
Yeah, he just attacks. He doesn't buff your party. He doesn't do anything. He's just there attacking. And sometimes he's counterintuitive because, we got that part in the lighthouse with the green and red switches coming up where he just attacks everything in the environment, and that's not what you need right about now.
Yeah, he will definitely run off a few times. And there's one room coming up that it was definitely not ideal. It's good to have a fourth character there, even a bad one, but still was kind of underwhelming for this to be the last guest in the game.
Yeah, he hits hard at least.
That
was useful.
So with the Ridorana Cataract, but I love the two things I kind of love about this area. A1, there's another Malboro enemy here, a little one. It's named Cassie. Like, I don't know why it's named Cassie. Like, that doesn't even make sense. It's very dangerous. I've died a couple times to him, but it's just we'll call it Cassie. Cool. I don't know why.
There's Vivian and
Cassie. There's Vivian. And Vivian wears a little purple crown on top of her head.
And so also a lot of traps, and the trap system here. There's one in particular where in the City of Other Days where you wander up to a save slot, and if you don't have Libra on, there's like 5 traps in a row directly on the way to the save crystal. So if you don't have it on, you basically probably just wipe immediately, which feels like a really trollish way of putting in traps. Like some designer just got bored. It's literally 5 in a row, like on top of each other.
It's a real fucker, and you would only see it if you come up the stairs to that save crystal and you make a beeline to it. And if you don't make an actual beeline, it's fine.
It's fine. It feels like somebody just how much more frustrating can we make this for people who aren't knowing that you should use Libra at this point.
Let's punish these people for not buying our guide.
Fucking holy shit.
Let's teach them a lesson.
I don't mind this last little section. I mean, if are we ready to go on into the Pharos
lighthouse?
Man,
so you go through the cataract. You go to the lighthouse. It's this gigantic tower.
It's a beautiful tower,
huge,
old, and you're looking for the Suncrest at the top of it. But
you fight a half dead dragon to get there.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird. The boss encounters here progressively got more difficult. as you go up. I don't know how nitty gritty we want to get about. I want to talk about the third ascent. I think is the one that I got really second or third. I forget which one, but
Well,
I don't recall having.
We've already talked about how it's shitty when the game asks you to pick up those little orbs that are hard to get in the first place.
Yeah, so let's go chronologically. First, you fight Hydro. It's just a dragon. I found this boss fight very simple.
Yeah, I
no
one-shotted
problems
him.
there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then the first descent, you need to fight random encounters, and then they will sometimes leave behind black orbs. You use the black orbs to activate a few different devices, kind of around this. All of the levels in this section kind of surround this central column of mist that's flowing up to the top of the tower.
Great visual.
And so it's super awesome to look at, and generally there's important stuff kind of wrapped around that central column. In this section on the first ascent, it's the first floor of the tower, and you need to take these black orbs and put them into machines that are kind of centrally located around that column of mist. And when you power them using these black orbs, it will unlock a room, the Altar of Night, and inside of the Altar of Night you fight a giant turtle named Pandemonium. I found that one also to be very simple.
Yeah, I think he had one little phase where he couldn't be attacked, but once you just wait that out, he was a one-shot for me.
Yeah, I believe it's called a paling. He sets up a paling, which basically gives him an immunity, and it's a real pain when the later bosses. Now, the only part of the first ascent that really gave me trouble was when you had to defeat the brain pans to build
So that's
bridges.
the second ascent.
No, that's the first flight. I thought we built... No,
sorry. Yeah, it's the first flight. It's after the first floor, but it's the first flight. The naming conventions again.
The Wellspring Revel... The first flight, second flight, third flight. So you have to build these bridges by killing a very specific enemy. But also there's an alternate enemy known as the, Die-Brain or Didar, which will undo the green, and the green will undo the red. And when you have Redis, who's just running around doing whatever the fuck he wants to do, he will kill everything in the area. So when the game places a green pan next to a red pan, you basically have to have your finger on the flee button to prevent your characters from undoing all of your hard work.
Yeah, and so the way that it works is there's like gaps that you need to make a bridge to cross, and the way that you make the bridge is by killing these green like face-looking monsters, and when you kill them, they will fill in a gap of the bridge, and then once you kill enough, it'll cover the entire span, and when you walk over it, it becomes solid ground. And
this is also where a lot of the chests or orb or urn things here started dropping some pretty seriously good equipment. And there are a lot of them hidden around, too, though. Some of them are hidden behind fake walls. Some of them are hidden behind these bridges you have to build.
That sounds interesting, because in my version, there's these full facades that false walls that you walk through, and there's usually treasure chests behind them, or so I was told, but I didn't see a single fucking one, because the drop rate on those treasure chests was low enough that even though I found every single fool's facade, I didn't find a single treasure chest behind any of them. Oh, man.
So I guess in our version it's a little bit easier, because you can get some of the best loot in the game in this level, and then the next level prior. It's like I was able to give my Ulan a Gunganir. God damn it, these names. Yeah. And that's one of the best spears, because it will automatically cast Dispel when you use it. And then also, this is your only opportunity in the Zodiac edition, I don't know how it works for you, Gino, to get Holy Magic.
Yeah, Holy's in here somewhere too, and I believe I missed that entirely.
You have to build a red bridge. The red bridges are optional. The green bridges are required.
There's one in here that I didn't realize until I read the walkthrough. Apparently, right before the end boss of this dungeon, you are in a cutscene where your characters are walking, and as you get out of it, you have walked past the secret door to the treasure, so you have to turn around and go back and find the secret door to find the treasure, which is just like fucking man, they're just playing around with you at this point.
And then also, this is where you can get your first ribbon, but it will be only if you've killed 10 Didars. A Vishnu will pop up, and there is a 4% chance that it will drop a ribbon.
Awesome. Yeah, the ribbon is the best, I do a accessory in the game, and I never saw one. I didn't care enough to go.
I tried
it
it like 2 or 3 times, but it was a 4% drop rate, and I'm like, I value my time, and I will pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a 65% chance that most of these treasure chests would show up, and then a 50% chance that it would have a useful item in it. So I ended up getting none of the chests to show up, and the only treasure chests I got useful items out of were ones that showed up 100% of the time and had 100% the same contents.
And it can't be said enough, this is an unpleasant environment to wander around in. It's not... There's pretty parts of it. For the most part, it's just like brick or stone walls, and
you're climbing stairs.
Fairly tough enemies, and it's all spread out over a lot of individual floor maps. Like I think there must be 5 or 6 on the second ascent alone that you're trying to warp through. So unless you know specifically what you're looking for, you're probably not going to find it.
In one of these levels, in the second part, you have a choice about losing an ability that can seriously fuck up your game if you're not careful
about that.
Let's talk about this.
You climb through 47 like from the 10th floor to the 47th floor, and then you fight Slit, which is a like fish monster. It's also not very hard.
Yeah,
then
you're not going
you get
every
to the
floor,
second ascent.
but you see enough of them.
Yeah.
You get to the second ascent, and this is where you have to give up an ability. So the 4 choices you can make are sacrificing wealth. If you sacrifice wealth, that means you can't use items for this section of the dungeon.
Didn't really make itself clear. Like I didn't get the connection between those.
That's the problem. Like it says altar of knowledge. It's like what the fuck is this going to do? It's just going to remove the axis of your minimap. It's like what? And then then there's another one where it's like altar of steel. I'm white. Oh yeah, you can't attack anymore.
Yeah, you can't use weapons if you choose altar of steel. You can't use magic if you use the threshold of magic. The threshold of knowledge gets rid of your minimap. So those are your 4 choices. You have to get rid of one of your abilities. You can either choose to get lost if you don't have a map, or you're going to really cripple your party. I found that items or knowledge were the 2 most losable for me, but that was because I had an actual map.
Nobody's going to get through that part of the game without being able to attack, so I don't think anybody picks that one.
I think I used Altar of Knowledge, and I literally played with the overlay of the actual map on top of the screen the entire time.
There you go. One of the crazy things here, though, is that you have to remember the color of the altar that you pick, which comes out to be incredibly important in about half an hour. I had no idea what the color was, which meant... Well, let's talk about that when we talk about it.
So, after this section, this area I found was the most dangerous in terms of enemies. There are a bunch of undead knights and such, and they generally run around with full buffs, and they'll run like 4 deep, and if they catch you, you can just get wiped very quickly. So I ran through this section as quickly as I could. Then you fight Fenrir, a large lion man or tiger man. He wasn't especially difficult. Then you get the 3rd ascent, which is where we get the teleport stones that, Rorie, it sounded like you had a bad time.
Fuck me. So it's pretty clear. They honestly aren't too coy about it. They'll tell you the first 3. I did this many times, so remember, it's black, green, red. That is not too complicated. The 4th one, if you have to find the teleport that matches the color of the thing you gave up, which for me, I didn't remember at all. I had no idea. It turns out I think it was yellow or colorless or something like that. The important thing to remember is that if you miss 2 or you get 2 bad teleports, pick the wrong color twice in a row, you go to the death room full of ghosts and these things that will confuse your characters and put diseases on you. I went through this enough to the point where I actually started just being able to beat it. I don't think it was supposed to be a winnable encounter because they also kind of spawn up at the same time. I started doing the flea thing where I'd walk up, spawn a couple, drag them over, kill them, and then do that, clear out the room. After you do that, you go upstairs, and there's still another set of teleports, which can also fuck you up. I think I went through this entire section. I think I spent about 2 hours trying to get through. I read a couple walkthroughs that didn't work. One of the walkthroughs said you could pick any color for the 4th teleport. That's not true at all.
Oh, that is very not true.
Yeah.
Well, you picked the right one.
But here's the problem. I did Altar of Knowledge, and my guide just said, pick the purple sigil. There's 2 purple sigils. What am
Yeah.
I supposed to do?
Yeah, one's pink, one's purple.
There's also a hidden path apparently through a fool's facade. I tried that too. That didn't work.
I ended up doing that. The fool's facade is really hard to see, and it's like a white sigil that you touch.
Mm-hmm.
You had to have done the correct one previously without a mistake. Otherwise, it'll transport you to the lower level.
And there's waystones here that will teleport you around in a different method.
I believe I told Gino about my grand fuck up. Did you get those messages on Slack, Gino, about my...
I did, but I wasn't sure how you fucked up.
I think I had to go back to the beginning and start this whole thing multiple times.
I completed. Let me tell you how this game it literally broke me. Like, I rage quit the game and then walked away and then contemplated. It's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish it. Luckily, I did. So, I was on the third ascent, and I just finished it, and I, of course, knew that there was going to be some sort of horrible boss at the end, which we'll talk about shortly. And so I desperately needed to save my game. So I thought, oh, man, how about I touch the warp stone and have it bring me back to a place where I can use a crystal. So if you use the warp stone, the last warp stone, at the top of the third ascent, do you know where it teleports you?
Very beginning, I believe.
The very beginning of the level.
And you can't go back. It doesn't work like these stones normally work. It has a coy message about it, like you're gonna have to walk back maybe if you don't do it right. I forget what it says. It's pretty vague though. It does. Every other waystone in the entire game will just bring you right back to where you hit it. This one is like there are multiple waystones and it does not connect back. So if you hit it, you are fucked. And I did this exact same thing. I think twice.
I did it once.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that there were the elevators, so I could have skipped some of the levels. Just some of the levels, not all of the levels. So I literally retraced my steps every fucking time. I did it twice.
Yeah, I did the whole thing, I think, maybe the whole teleport section of it, I went through there at least, I think, 7 or 8 times before I figured out how to... when I got to the boss first, and he killed me immediately, and then we go all the way back to the beginning anyways, and then I got back to the boss, and I figured out I needed to go back and find some spells. So, not even including random, like, fucking up on the teleports, I think I had to do the whole thing 3 times just to get to a point where I could beat the boss. It was incredibly frustrating.
And just to highlight how there's no easy or accessible forms of grinding, this is one of the points where it's like, oh, maybe it's time for me to grind. It's like leaving this area to find one of those safe places to grind is such a pain in the fucking ass. And then there's also, there's not an easy place for you to grind once you reach level 30, so it's hard. You get stuck.
Well, I thankfully had a guide for the teleporting. I was able to get the Fool's Facade, and that gives you access to a dragon whisker and rubber suits, which are pretty good items. But then you get to Hashmal, the bringer of order, who is the boss after all of the teleporting. He jumps you when you hop on top of an elevator, and he uses disease. He's an earth summon. He hits you with earth spells, so if you have float on your party, they don't damage you. But if he just hits you with a physical attack, has a pretty high chance to inflict your character with disease, which basically causes your HP
to drop to 1.
HP. Well, it's your current HP and your max HP are the same.
Yeah.
So as you keep taking damage, your max HP will go down with your current HP, and you can't heal until you're at 1, and then you can't heal beyond 1. So you need to hit vaccines, otherwise he will one-shot every party member who he hits.
I never had any vaccines. I had 0 vaccines in my entire inventory. Where the hell are they? Apparently serums work too. I never found either of those. Not a single one. I was looking for them in vendor lists. I couldn't find out where to buy them. And then the other thing was cleanse, which I had to go back and find, which is holy shit.
Yeah, I never got cleanse. I bought some vaccines from Balfenheim Port, the area right before you come to the
I must have totally missed them. I definitely never found any, because I didn't have any in my inventory.
This is another case where this game has so many negative status effects that there are different items for each one.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't generally stock more than like 4 or 5 of any given item, because most of the time you're not getting hit with the same status effects over and over and over again. And they're expensive to have, 20 of every negative status effect. Like, I could have barely afford some of the equipment. I wasn't going to double down on one specific negative status effect item. and they're more expensive. Like the later status effects are more expensive to heal too.
Yeah.
So like disease, I think vaccines are like 200 gil, and then something like echo herbs, things that cure silence, are like 50 gil. So it's 4 times more expensive to cure this problem.
Yeah.
And then remedies are like 400 gil. So, to be covered, you need to.
And in order for those
more.
remedies to do what you want to do, you need to find the spots on your license grid to make them useful. And for us, those spots are spread across like 3 or 4 classes.
Yeah, and for me, thankfully, it was just every one of my characters could have maximum remedies. But it's a giant pain in the ass. I, for this battle, had 10 vaccines and I think 10 remedies. And so the way I beat the boss was I got wiped a few times, and then I set up a gambit that just said any character use vaccine. And the game is smart enough to only use items when they're actually useful.
Yeah.
It won't just use vaccines on a character because they're targetable. It'll only use it if they have disease. So I set up a gambit on all of my characters that just had them cure disease immediately. And if you do that, they will respond fast enough to keep Hashmal off.
He's not a super difficult boss once you get the disease thing figured out. In my case, I didn't know where to. I probably should have looked up where to buy vaccines, but I figured after a while I had no way to deal with disease, so I just left the entire dungeon. Went back and looked up where to find the cleanse spell, which is in the Sorobi Steps in one treasure chest in the entire fucking game. And it has a 20% chance to spawn, so you have to walk in and out. It's just by the end of this process, he wasn't difficult to beat when he figured out disease.
No.
And
he has 3 attacks.
Yeah.
He just will use physical attacks that inflict disease.
Yeah. I absorbed the Quaka. I didn't realize float would make me immune. I just took it and healed through it, and that was totally workable when it wasn't diseased, but just the most frustrating thing in the world to get. I literally would not have been able to beat this boss without a strategy guide. I would not have any idea.
It's another example of also this game trying to have these like MMORPG like conceits to them, like these kind of gameplay hooks. Like I thought, oh hey, the solution is clearly I need to have my tank aggro him, so I'm gonna set up decoy, I'm gonna set up bubble, I'm gonna have all this, and then it's like disease half, now you're back to your normal health, disease one more time, now you're back to 1, and now my tank does lose. You basically uncoupled all of the meaning I've had out of this idea of tanking and aggroing in this single boss battle, which this game has been preparing me to do. Like, it has basically asked me to do this exact kind of line of logic, follow these exact steps, every single boss battle prior, and then it just decides to uncouple that.
I really can't think of another MMO or any RPG that really lets you miss spells. Like, almost everything else, you get them as you level up, or you buy them from any vendor. The cleanse thing just threw me for a fucking loop. It was baffling. And apparently there's a lot of spells that I missed, which I wasn't aware of.
Oh no, yeah.
It's worth mentioning also, ZP, you mentioned that you're using Bubble. In my version of the game, Bubble is a spell you can buy. You can only buy from your clan merchant.
Oh God, really?
And you can only get access to it if you have a certain clan rank. So you have to do a certain number of hunts before you can even buy Bubble.
But it's the same case in the Zodiac edition. It's just I was the one in this group that did all of the hunts up till the one where you have to do the evil boss at the end.
Yeah, it was just for me, I actually, after the lighthouse, decided to grind out a little bit, like try to do some of the side quests and some of the hunts, and I did a bunch of the hunts, and I still couldn't get access to Bubble. Like I think I did at least 10.
Now you got to do like 20
hunts.
or 30.
I know, and it was just like, it's such a waste of your time. If this game does not respect your time in some spots, at least you can beat the game without Bubble, but Bubble doubles your HP temporarily.
Yeah.
Like, that's huge.
I was looking at that
so
in
impactful.
Some of the videos that somebody was using. I was like, how did you do that? Like, I have no idea what spell you're using on this. Decoy for a tank and Bubble, I was looking at some of the strategies for later in the game, the last dungeon, and I was definitely not doing that. I definitely should have.
Bubble, you have to kill 16 ranks. So 16 hunts you need to complete.
Yeah, I didn't do that many. And then they also have like bravery.
I never got bravery.
I didn't get access to.
I never got bravery and faith.
Both of them buff your damage significantly, and I never got access to them. So you need to do hunts and stuff. It's amazing. They're great, important utility spells that you just don't get to use unless you buy into this game's side quest
Where's
bullshit.
Arise? I have Raise, but I never found Arise, which I guess is more health when you bring somebody back from the dead.
It's full health.
Full health?
full
That
health
seems like
when
it would
you-
be handy. I don't know.
Yeah, you get that. So after I went to the slime room a few times, I had 40 teleport stones, and so I started teleporting more liberally, and I teleported back to Rabanastre because it's, the main hub, and Rabanastre is the place that will continually upgrade its inventory as you go back there, and that's where I was able to buy a Rise.
Sells Balfenheim, yeah, but I probably just missed it and was on me, but that's really a bad one to be able to miss.
But also, why make you double back to a town that there's no story reason to go there for long stretches of the game? There's a lot of places where it's just, you need to know that at a certain point in the game, the vendor gains access to this item. You have no reason to ever go back to that town.
And there's no
or go
purpose
back to the
to
vendor.
limiting it to one vendor. They should be in every vendor in the game, like every
Yeah.
other RPG works.
There are certain vendors throughout the world that have exclusive items that you can only buy from that specific vendor. And I get that it's a video gamey thing to add into this story, but just have every vendor sell exactly the same thing as you unlock them as you go through the story.
At least for spells, that makes sense. Like for weapons, okay, you don't need to have every weapon in the game for every vendor, but with spells that you might materially affect your ability to play the game.
Or maybe this is the better solution. How about this? How about when I unlock the spell on my fucking license board, you just give it to me?
Yep, it'd be nice.
Yeah, or go with the Final Fantasy VIII or 9 version, where when you get to the end of the game, the latest vendor has all the shit you need. It's just the latest one. Which one is it? It's the one you just met. The old ones have old shit that doesn't matter anymore. So it's annoying. It was very frustrating, and getting all of this stuff coming to a head towards the end of the game was a pain in the ass, because there were a bunch of spells that I knew would make all these battles cakewalks, and instead I was slogging through them because I didn't have access to them, because I didn't buy into the side quests.
But the good news is that the story gets good.
Yes. So at this point, before, we didn't mention it, but there was a small cutscene where Vayne and Larsa, before you go to the port,
They make a bet.
The lighthouse. They make a bet, basically, that...
Which seems like a really foolish thing when we're talking about the end of the world, but yeah, they make a bet.
Yeah. Vayne bets that Ash wants revenge and wants to destroy Arcadia as retribution for what happened to Dalmasca. Larsa says, I bet she isn't trying to do that. I bet she's just trying to bring peace to her people. And they send Gabranth to shadow you, basically, to the lighthouse. And if you're going to cut the Suncrest and make a super weapon, he's supposed to stop you. And if you don't do that, he is supposed to report back and say, actually, they want peace, and let's broker a peace. But when you get there, Ash states her intention to destroy the Suncrest instead of, cutting off new stones to make more war. And he does not accept this.
Yeah, for some reason, Gabranth sees that, she's got good intentions. I'm going to try and antagonize her to see if she's really for realsies.
Yeah, and basically because Bosch is Gabranth's twin brother, he can't accept that Bosch is doing good and being honorable, because both of them failed to save their home country, and it's basically a personal grudge that is clouding his vision.
But for reasons that are really unbeknownst to anyone other than himself, Gabranth just spills the bean on virtually every important plot beat about his history and his past. He admits to being Bosch's brother. He talks about how they both failed to protect their country. He admits to killing Rex. He admits to killing Ash's father. He admits to framing Bosch. He says everything all at once. Why? Because I guess it's time for him to just give you his entire story arc in a 5-minute cutscene.
Yeah, and he also reveals that Redis is Judge
Zagrabanth. No, wait, Zagrabanth is the other guy, Zect. Who was Balthier? He was Judge whatever what.
He was some other judge, probably with a Z, I forget. But he reveals that Redis was also a judge, and he was the person who destroyed Nabudis, and you then have to fight Gabranth. That fight's pretty easy. He's just a regular enemy for the most part. He doesn't even have any super moves, really. Once you defeat him, Dr. Sid shows up, and he starts doing magics and shit, and explains that Vana and him are going to bring the Age of Men and cast down the Age of Gods. He has a bunch of magicite, and it causes him to gain superpowers, and he starts, like, just cackling with energy and flying around and shit. The fight against him's pretty cool. He eventually, like, he takes out a machine gun.
Yeah,
and shoots it at
that's
a big
pretty rad.
Gatling gun.
I would laughed a lot when that happened. It's somebody. There's people responsible for all these boss fights, and I think whoever the narrative lead kind of let the weird kid on the team like write the dialogue for Sid. And
Sid's dialogue, like the voice actor, especially in the English version, he just sells it. He's so good.
He hits.
It works.
I like these two bosses. I think I one-shotted both of them. They weren't too difficult. The Vana thing, it says how confused I am by some of the story stuff. I thought Vana was like a generic term for the summoning people, not a specific name for this specific one. It was interesting, but he splits apart and you can only attack one of them at a time or something like that. But it wasn't too difficult to get through. I did like Sid's little death sequence. He really, really goes for it.
Yeah, and he summons an Esper in the fight, which is cool. He summons Famfrit.
He's got this big old water jug.
Stand-in. He's the Aquarius Esper. And he eventually starts using a laser cannon, which is also really cool.
Yeah.
But luckily he's not that hard to beat.
I just love the image of him pulling out this Gatling gun that comes from nowhere. It's just he pulls out this giant Gatling gun and he just shoots up the entire temple.
He shoots it up and then the shells explode.
Yep.
It's awesome.
It's neat.
When you beat him,
and luckily, pretty much a pure damage fight. I didn't recall any really bad status effect stuff, which I think probably by the time they were playtesting this, everybody's sick of it and just like, give me something straight.
Yeah, well, and then they unlearned that with the last boss rush at the end.
Famfrit will hit you with silence, but that's it. So it's not too bad. When you beat him, he causes the Suncrist to like spew mist everywhere, and he throws a bunch of crystals in the air and says Bahamut, drink deep. And it turns out that he's basically releasing energy to power a super weapon in Arcadia. But before he can successfully do all the nefarious shit he was trying to do, you defeat him, he dies, and then it's cool. He says goodbye to Vana, like as he's dying. And then Vana says, the pleasure was all mine, which is cool because you get all of these
like
kind of
even
awesome
these villains have character arcs and
villains.
Relationships. They're not just these one-off assholes, which I think that the Final Fantasy franchise is a little guilty of. The bad guy's just evil. He's not an actual person, or she's not an actual person. She's like Dr. Sid has an actual friendship with Vana, and Vana feels like an actual character that has like honest intentions of freeing humanity from the clutches of the Arcadia.
Yeah, it's an Arcadia that has betrayed. She's a class traitor, and decides that actually my people have been ruling this world for too long. We need to turn it over to mortal beings. And then
another thing I like about it is Sid does not have a redemptive arc. He's like, I make no apologies. I did what I did. I don't care.
Yeah.
Why don't you go off and run off? Do you want me to say apologies? No.
Yeah, these last 6 years were some of the best of my life. And he's just like talking to this ghostly creature. And they're like, yeah, the pleasure was all mine. And I really enjoyed Gabron saying, like, the dead demand justice. Why aren't you avenging your people? And Vaughn and Ash just basically say that what's done is done, and what would revenge change? What would killing more people do? And he can't understand, because he's so driven by revenge, that they would be able to look past someone doing wrong to his country.
One of the few moments where Vaughn actually works as a character, he presents this alternate viewpoint, and his viewpoint is founded under his own experiences, and you believe what he's trying to say.
Exactly. His brother died, and he
moved on.
He moves on. It's a nice scene, and it makes all of these characters come together. Awesome. After this section, you fly back to Balfenheim.
Wait, did we go over the
Suncryst?
Suncryst stuff,
right?
Yeah, which is
this
baffling.
Is weird. I still don't kind of understand. So it's a giant like crystal on the top of this tower, and it's got like weird spider webs in it.
Well, it's mist. There's a bunch of mist
So,
that's flowing into it constantly.
What exactly did Dr. Sid do to cause it to start exploding?
So what he did, he used some nethicite to cause it to release.
But didn't the
mist that's
nethicite
trapped
come
in
from
it.
the Suncrest?
So he had the manufactured nethicite that he
So
made.
he makes his own nethicite? I feel like
Yes.
I've never had this communicated. Okay. So,
yeah, they talked about manufactured nethicite, and then what's his name? Larsa had one, and then you have it as an item in your inventory.
Larsa eventually uses the manufactured nethicite to do good stuff. Why did the manufactured nethicite do bad stuff here?
Because Sid had it, and not Larsa. Because Sid used it for bad purposes instead of... Look, he's a bad guy with a gun, and Larsa is a good guy with a gun.
So... They have to use the sword, but not the first sword, the Dynast King sword.
Well,
they have
you
to
can
use
use either
treaty
sword.
blade. Like, there's two swords that they have to use to cut, and one does good shit, and the other one does bad shit, right?
No, the swords are they're just swords. So you could use the sword. Either sword would have cut the Suncrest just fine. They are capable of cutting this giant crystal.
But didn't the Arcadia want them to cut the crystal? Like, I thought they wanted us to cut the crystal, and we cut the crystal, and then not the bad stuff didn't happen.
Well, so what they wanted you to do is basically shave off a piece. They wanted you to cut a little piece off and then use that piece. They wanted you to, take a little chip and use some of the power from that. What Ash wanted to do was cut the whole thing apart and destroy it. So there's different goals here. Either you can shave off a little bit and then use it as a weapon, or if you destroy all of it, the theory was it would destroy the power of these crystals to begin with, and then there'll only be conventional weapons in this war instead of having these super weapons. But what Sid does is he releases a bunch of mist from the Suncrest, and when he does that, it powers Arcadia's super weapon, the Bahamut.
Wait, did they create Bahamut, or was just Bahamut something that they found? So
no, it's one of their big ass ships.
So they made a giant airship that the mist went to because the mist. Why did the mist go to? Why didn't it just go somewhere else?
So it's got a bunch of...
I'm literally... the only reason why I'm asking these questions is this has literally confused me and I have no idea what happened. It was very visually beautiful. I thought Redis's moment was one of the best scenes in the game, but it's like I don't understand why it happened.
Yeah, so the nethicite, what makes it powerful is it can absorb mist is magical energy, essentially. It's a physical representation of magical energy, and those crystals are capable of containing high quantities of mist. So they are just like super concentrated magical objects. And when he starts letting the mist out, it's letting out that magical energy. The Bahamut, I believe, has a bunch of nethicite in it, so it has these batteries that are basically empty, and when the mist starts coming out, it powers those crystals that then power the ship. That is my understanding.
And so, in the end, Redis does destroy the Suncrest.
Killing himself.
The implication is that it explodes because he dies. He's not in the story anymore. But everybody else just kind of, in the cutscene, is teleported back to the ship somehow. They're all up there when it explodes. And then the next thing, smash cut, you don't see the explosion at all. You just see them all on the ship looking up. Like, wow, that was a big explosion. Like, you were just there. What the fuck happened?
Yeah. Like, also, we're forgetting, like, all of those weird scenes where, like all of the characters are wondering, it's like, do you think she's going to cut a little piece off and create her own weapon, or do you think she's going to actually do the right thing and fucking destroy the crystal? And then Ash is right there. They're talking behind her back, and she's in the same frame, like she's right there. They're just talking behind her back. It's like, what, and it's like, there's this giant explosion, and like, I guess Redis died, but everyone else survived.
Yeah. Yeah, they somehow dodged the bullet. Unclear. Don't ask about it. And this is also where we learned that Rassler, the ghost that
was Vana all along. But then didn't the
not
Arcadia...
Vana, it was a different Arcadia.
It was a different Arcadia? I thought it was Vana.
Yeah. I think it was a different Arcadia that was trying to get her there. So they were trying to manipulate her to stop Vana, and Vana was manipulating the other people to stop the Arcadia. So she's
like I said, I think that the Arcadia part of this story is the worst part of it, and I wish it was not here, and this was just a story of a driven dictator that wants to create the biggest, most powerful empire in the world, or that they are well-intentioned extremists. Their means are totally immoral and horrible, but there's a kernel of truth to what they're doing, which is creating a destiny led by humanity versus being played around like a fiddle by these mythical gods. Like, there's two different ways to go about it, and it just is a muddled mess in the middle if you try to strike a balance between the toes, and we're stuck in the middle.
I think I like it. I like that they gave the villains a kind of noble
Are you
cause,
saying you like it in this game, or are you saying that you're fine with the way that it's done in this game? Because I would push back at that.
I don't like the lore dumps, but I like that Vayne and Sid have this kind of noble restore history to humanity mission that they're on, so they are not just mustache-twirling monsters.
But they are mustache-twirling monsters because he turns into some sort of super mutant at the end, and like you see like 4 or 5 acts of genocide that Vayne has done or is guilty of.
That's the thing. He is both a kind of avenger trying to free humanity from the chains of these undying beings, but he's also an egomaniacal monster at the same time. And so he is talking about himself as a savior, and in some ways he is, but he is also this authoritarian who murdered his father, murdered 2 of his brothers, and would rule with an iron fist, and would clearly be a devastating problem if he was the person in charge. So he was kind of chosen for this role of freeing humanity, but he is the wrong person to choose. Ash was the person who was actually who actually frees humanity and is a capable leader.
So this leads us, I guess we'll just talk about the point of no return.
Yeah, so after this, the Bahamut rises up, Redis dies, and then we need to go to the final confrontation on the Bahamut. When you fly, you get access to the Strahl at this point, and it's Balthier's ship. It lets you fly wherever you want. You can do a bunch of side quests. We've talked enough about the side quests.
Real quick nitpick, like the interface of using the Strahl, and you just have this wonderful map of all these multiple locations. God, how do I wish that was what they used for the teleport crystals. Instead, they give you this drop-down menu of names. It's not a map.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. And half the time when you have a destination that you want to go to, it's not really quite the same name. Like, it's not organized in a way that makes...
I wish they had used that map. Oh, my God.
ZP, did you do the Gilgamesh
I
fight?
did! Did you not do Gilgamesh?
I did it the first time I played this
Oh, it's so good. He pulls out the gunblade.
Yeah. So, Rory, have you ever done the Gilgamesh fight in this game?
I might have. I did not do it this
So he's like a comical little ninja guy with his dog Echidnu, and when he fights you, he's using the swords of previous Final Fantasy games. So he's got I think he starts out with Sephiroth's sword, and then he does the giant Zack sword. He's got the Buster sword. He's got the Gunblade. He's got the weird like warped up sword from Final Fantasy X.
He's got the Orichalcon from Final Fantasy IX. He's got the Brotherhood from Final Fantasy X. He's got basically all the named swords. He's got Excalibur, and he's a recurring character who's been in multiple Final Fantasy games.
This might be my favorite version of Gilgamesh so far.
But yeah, 5 I think has my favorite version of Gilgamesh, and that's where this version is kind of based on the most. And this battle, it's actually called the Battle on the Big Bridge, which is a callback to Final Fantasy V. So I especially enjoyed him. He's got some of the best armor in the game that you can steal from him, and he's still a comic relief character, which is awesome. So I didn't do this side quest this time, but it stood out as the one hunt that was worth a damn, and it's a shame that you need to do so much to get to it.
So, gotta say, the cutscenes for the Bahamut battle might well be the best part of the game. Like,
yeah.
Oh my God! It is beautiful. It is aged perfectly. Like I know that
2006.
2006. These cutscenes are over 10 years old. Man, they still are great. I mean, you go back to like Final Fantasy X and 9, like those cutscenes, but like, man, the cutscenes in this game, I think, are still just mwah. They're perfect. They're beautiful.
Yeah, they were so out ahead in terms of what they could do at the time. And there's this large sky battle. The Bahamut's this giant flying fortress, and it shoots shells that, like, cause ships to implode on themselves before blowing up. And Larsa is basically telling Vane, hey, they've surrendered. What if we don't go to war here? And Vane's like, nah, we need to teach them a lesson. And so he shoots down a ship. Oh, and it turns out that the reason why there's a battle happening is the Rosarian forces, which is the other empire that Arcadia is
some of their soldiers messed up.
With. Yeah, some of their soldiers joined the Resistance, which is this third-party group. And once they joined the Resistance, Al-Cid was trying to prevent war, but some of the generals who were in control of the military had some of their soldiers in bed with the Resistance so that they looked like Resistance soldiers, but were actually Rosarian soldiers taking direction from the Rosarian generals, and they basically triggered a armed conflict by attacking Arcadian ships under the guise of the Resistance, and by doing that, they start a small conflict that then escalates and draws in the Rosarian forces, well, would threaten to draw in the Rosarian forces and bring down the whole Arcadian ship. So it's got some good Game of Thrones, high drama sort of stuff.
World War I kind of alliances and stuff.
Exactly. It's very World War I. There's alliances that are happening, and individual soldiers making individual choices are working around the machinations and ideals of the leaders of these countries, because once war starts, it's hard to stop it from spreading. So Vane destroys a ship, and then because he's destroyed a ship that had already surrendered, he makes clear that there will be no surrender. So the entire Resistance commits to a large-scale battle, which is exactly what Vane wants. They start fighting, and the battles between these ships are awesome to look at, like the Alexander.
Like they're also just beautiful ship design. Everything looks so like it's like art design that only works in this game, and it fits the world and the theme of high fantasy perfectly.
Yeah, I love that the Alexander looks like the Summon Alexander, but still a ship, and like the Atomoses look a little bit like the Summon, but they also function as ships. It's great design on all of these. They go to battle. The Marquis commits all of his soldiers. They start fighting. And then as the battle's going on, you sneak in with the Strahl and board the Bahamut. And then you need to run to the central elevator column.
Golly, there's some real fucked up enemies here. Can we also talk about how there's no fucking save crystal before the battle that you're about, like the series of battles we got up here? So,
yeah.
Like, one, it's the final level in the game. Normally what Final Fantasy games do is like, oh, hey, this is the last level. Get your shit together. But this game has the fucking random encounters, basically the random encounters here, and they're infinite. So you constantly, as you're getting up to the final boss rush, you're losing health, losing MP, using your items, using your magic as you're en route to a non-opt-out boss rush. And there's some enemies like those spinners, like the fucking rooks, those weird like robot things that can really mess you up.
Yeah, you're actually... The thing to do here is actually just run by them. Don't fight any enemies in here. Run past them. Run straight to the elevator where the boss rush starts. Try not to get hit too much.
And I get that it's the end of the game, so you have no reason to hold on to your mega elixirs or elixirs, so just use them with reckless abandon. But like the fact that one, there's no save crystal. Two, like I don't want to have to watch the entire fucking like I don't want to have to go through this entire thing all over again because I died on part 3 of a 3-part boss rush, or 4-part boss rush.
That's what I ran into. So you fight Gabronth, and the first half of the Gabronth fight is really easy. He's very weak. You mess him up. Once you get him to 50% damage, he talks some shit to Bosch again.
Which there's special cutscenes if you fight him with Bosch.
Yeah, if you fight him without Bosch, he's just like, look at your friends. I'm going to kill them, and you're too much of a coward to fight me. And if you fight with Bosch, he's like, why do you still fight Bosch? Why are you honorable? And it's cool. At 50% health, he completely re-heals himself. And then from then on, he gains more defense and power and speed the lower his HP is. So he becomes harder to hit and harder to kill the more you damage him. So I found that I needed to get him down to like maybe a fifth of his health and then just fire off a quickening burst to kill him so that he didn't keep getting stronger and stronger. Otherwise, he just wiped my party. He was annoying to fight because of that.
Then you have Vayne.
You get Vayne.
The first Vayne battle. Larsa joins you, and that's kind of cool. It's like, oh, Larsa, I missed you. I missed you so much.
I love that Vayne in like the earlier battle says, Larsa, if you think I'm wrong, you're going to need to get the power to stop me.
And he pulls out his little sword.
He pulls out his sword and says, I'm going to stop you.
And then it was really fun that in the middle of this battle of like the last boss rush, Larsa would just pop potions on my characters.
Yeah, he casts Protect on your party members and Shell, and he uses potions.
Larsa used a high potion. It's like, ugh, I miss you so much, Larsa.
Yeah. You fight Vayne. He's not that bad
the
first
time.
Then the second battle, after you beat him, he like messes up Larsa. And
so he has manufactured anesthesite running through his veins, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, basically, he hits the juice.
So, Mr. Rorie, do you know what this boss, the second, I don't know how much of this you got to see, the second boss rush, or the second boss battle with Vayne, he has all of these swords, like, hovering around him.
Yeah, I remember.
Do you know what this reminds me of?
Well, there's a Final Fantasy XV had a lot of the sword stuff in it as well, but I'm not sure which. No.
I'm asking about an equally frustrating boss battle of a non-Final Fantasy game that had a boss that summoned a bunch of swords that you had to fight as you got en route to beat the boss.
Knights
of the Old Republic
2. Kreia, yeah.
Kreia.
Darth Kreia.
Oh, man. I got some real bad flashbacks to the Kreia battle in KOTOR 2.
I only beat that game once. I remember it. Yeah.
Gino, if you let me take you through Knights of the Old Republic for a future podcast, I'm going to warn you. The boss battle, the final boss in Knights of the Old Republic 2 is one of the hardest things you will ever encounter on your podcast series. So be aware of that. The hardest boss. Oh my God!
I'll take that into advisement.
The one thing I'll say about this is, like, I talked about how, like, certain parts from the transition from 2D to 3D have never really held up. One of those things that I feel like has never really held up in the three-dimensional games, even with classic games like 10, 9, and 7 and 8, is like the final boss transforming into these eldritch abominations. They always look vastly inferior to those kind of, like, let's say, Kefka in Final Fantasy VI. Like, there's something about that extra level of polygons that they've never quite been able to make work. It's like, especially, like, Super Soldier Vayne, like, Mutant Super Soldier Vayne. Like, he looks dumb. He looks terrible.
He's just got those good abs, and it looks like he's been hitting the gym. He went from this lithe character who's really conniving and cunning to this roided out monster with swords flying around him, and he's floating. It looks chintzy more than anything. It makes
like his muscles kind of look plasticky. Like, it looks like a weird, like, thing.
He looks like an action figure.
Yeah.
And when you fight him, Gabronth joins you, but I found that he mostly just attacked the swords instead of helping.
Which actually was helpful in the long run because he would aggro the swords away from me. I don't know if
that wasn't bad. It would happen, but the swords didn't do that much damage. I didn't find this fight to be particularly tough.
But
then when you beat him, he tries to kill Gabronth for betraying him, but Larsa has that piece of manufactured anesthesite. He absorbs the swords into it, and then Vayne is defeated, but Vana says, nah, we're not done yet.
No, I think this is an actual good scene. Like, he apologizes to Vana that he's sorry that he's failed him, and, like, he really wanted to help Vana free humanity. And Vana's like, no, you did perfect. Thank you so much for your time. It's like, again, just to highlight, these villains have a motivation. These villains have a drive. And it's nice and refreshing to see them not yell at each other. And it's like, find him! Like in the classic anime voice. It's like, no, you did a great job. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Vayne asks, I think it was at the beginning of the fight, he asks Ash, like, as a leader, what would you do? Like, what do you want? And she says, I'm simply. Asks if she's an avenging angel or if she's like the leader of Dalmasca, and she says,
"I am who I am.
I'm simply myself,
Yeah.
No more, no less, and I want only to be free." And it's, I think, one of the best lines in the whole game. And in this section, Vane's dying, he's defeated, and Vana says, "Okay, we're going to do one last thing here. If you're going down, I'm going down with you." And they kind of fuse together into this giant flying Bahamut looking, like the giant dragon that you've seen
I think
in
it
other
looks
games.
okay in the cutscenes, but then what it looks like in battle looks dumb. This might be my least favorite final boss I've seen. Like in terms of just how it looks. It looks cheap and it's not impressive.
I like in theory, though, that the ship is the Bahamut, and then he strips a bunch of power and a bunch of parts from it, and then he looks like a giant flying dragon. I like that in theory, but like you said, the execution, it doesn't look super great. He flies around, he gets like sword arms and gun arms, and he just kind of flies around in a circle around you, attacking and using spells constantly. I found him to be pretty easy until he starts using barriers that prevent you from attacking him or using magic.
He also has weird magical abilities that can go through your barriers. Like he's got Piercing Furaga, as if Furaga wasn't a hard spell to deal with in the first. And he's got Mega Flare, like that can go through, all of your barriers and buffs. It ignores buffs.
He ignores buffs, and then there's sections where he can't take damage. And I found that to just be some of the cheapest design. Like, hey, how are we going to make this hard? What if for 3 minutes you couldn't hurt him? Cool. I guess I'll just use healing. Oh, but also none of your defensive spells do anything. Oh, awesome. So I'm just going to spend all of my resources healing my characters and just bide my time? That's what we're going to do? Awesome. Once you beat him, he's defeated, but the Bahamut is still moving. The resistance forces have defeated it, and basically your party convinces both sides that there's been a peace treaty signed, even though Lars is incapacitated.
Yeah, they have. Well, even before they have Vaughn. In order to have, what's the guy? That's
Gabronth?
No, the uncle to Ash.
Oh,
white hair guy.
The Marquis.
Huh?
Ondor.
They convince Ondor that they can go onto the Bahamut without him using his tractor bring to bring him back by having Vaughn fake Larsa's voice.
Yeah, and then they have Bosch fake Gabronth's voice. They have Ash, and I think Larsa actually speaks for himself. But they have all of these characters say, hey, we've got a peace treaty. The battle's over. Vane's dead. Just stop attacking. And so both sides put down their weapons, but the Bahamut is still moving because there's no one flying it anymore, and it's going to crash onto Rabanastre and level the entire city. Originally, one of the judges, Judge
Zagabranth.
Zargaboth, is flying the Alexander, and he wants to fly the Alexander into the Bahamut and shove it out of Rabanastre's airspace, and then he tells them to basically shoot the corpse of his ship after he's out of the way to make sure that the Bahamut doesn't crash on the city. But Balthier is still in the Bahamut, repairing it to try and make it so that it can fly again, so he can get the
crash-landed away.
The ship. Yeah, pilot the ship out of Rabanastre. They agree to let him try to do that. He repairs the ship, it starts flying, and then he flies it out of range of the city, but he leaves the straw to Penelo and Vaughn because he doesn't believe he's going to survive. Him and Fran have a nice little moment. I think they even do like a pound.
They do the fist bump in an earlier scene when they kill Vane, which is one of my favorite moments in the game. Like, just the fact that, these guys have... they're an item. They're a thing.
Yeah, they're awesome.
They're awesome.
They do a fist pound. He says, I'm the leading man. I can't die. And she's just like, I think you're more of a supporting character, which is pretty good. And then it cuts to 1 year later. Ash has become a queen. Penelo has a new look, and she's the narrator because finally they found something for Penelo to do. Vaughn has taken the straw, and he and Penelo are kind of doing sky piratey stuff. And then one day I guess Balthier takes the straw back and sends them off on another adventure a little bit.
I actually think that this might be, I'm going to say it, this might be my favorite epilogue in a Final Fantasy game, because I like how there's the element of melancholy in this epilogue. I mean, Penella makes the case, it's like, we were real good friends, but we've all kind of gone our way, and every day that passes, she makes the point of, like, Ash gets a little further away from us, but I guess that's just what happens in life. And I like that fact. I like the fact that Bosch and Ash don't become this wedded couple like they would have become in Final Fantasy IX, and they're all hugs and kisses and little fuzzy mitten moments. Like, I like the fact that they did the adventure, they cherish their memories, they're friends for life, but the adventure's over. You can't always have your happy ending.
Yeah. So that's the end of Final Fantasy XII. It's time to rank this thing.
I just want to say, in the end, I think that it's got a great story. I mean, final thoughts, everyone?
Yeah, it's one of the probably better mainline stories of any Final Fantasy. It's deep and kind of epic, but the gameplay is really what kind of drags it down.
I mean, I've made the case, it's visually stunning, it's beautiful, it has all of these great characters, it's got a story full of political intrigue, but I did not like playing this game. I
didn't either.
I would not play I would not play it in a box. I would not play it with the Fox. I would not play it in the air. I would not play it at a fair. I did not like playing it.
So let's remind. Here's our current listing of the Final Fantasy games.
From best to worst.
From best to worst. Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy I, Final Fantasy X-2, Mobius Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy X-2 Last Mission, and then Final Fantasy XIII.
In dead last.
In dead last forever. I don't see the Final Fantasy TCG in here somewhere, but it would probably be, if we haven't put it in here, I think it would probably be around Final Fantasy VIII, somewhere in there.
I think let's put it below 8.
Yeah, it'd be before 1.
Above 1, below 8.
Yeah, I've got it right there. I actually have Final Fantasy TCG penciled in below 8.
All right, do we want to start at the bottom or start at the top?
I think we probably want to start at the bottom.
Okay, is it better than Final Fantasy XIII?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Is it better than Final Fantasy The Last Mission? Yes.
Fuck yes.
Is it better than Mobius Final Fantasy?
Yes.
Is it better than Final Fantasy 1?
10-2.
Oh, 10-2. Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it better than... What's next, Gino?
Final Fantasy 1.
It's better than 1.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Is it better than the Final Fantasy TCG? I would say no.
Yes. It's an actual video game with a story. There's no story to the TCG.
Fine.
I think that it's fun to play, but the TCG doesn't bring, this epic storytelling. So I feel by default. Unless the story were rancid, Gino, and it had these kind of mechanics that we didn't like, then I think, in order to be ranked below a trading card game, you have to have a bad story and the gameplay doesn't work.
That's fine. So then it's below Final Fantasy VIII, because I don't think, no one here is going to say it's better than 8, right?
I think it's got a better story than 8.
Yeah, but I hate playing it.
Yeah, I can't say it's better than 8.
So it's not, so we have 8 then 7, right?
No, we have 9, 10, 7, 8, and then it would be 12. I think that's fine.
Okay, so we're going to rank it below 8, but below the trading card game.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where it lives.
Science.
I can live with that.
Science.
Final Fantasy XII is now the 5th best Final Fantasy game of all time. We're done with it.
I think somebody wants to go outside. You know what I take away from this game is that it led into Final Fantasy XIV. A lot of the world building and everything definitely seems like it kind of almost directly went into that at some point, which is great. I would love to play more in this universe. I don't think they made they never made a sequel or anything like that. But
they made they made the DS game. That's a tower defense game.
We're not going to play that.
We're not going to play that next. And then also, Grin was supposed to make a sequel that never got approved, or it didn't get past it got greenlit, and then they started formal development in the conceptual stage, and then Grin went bankrupt.
So I think that's actually a good transition, because ZP, we have talked about which game we're going to do next. I think we have agreement, correct?
No, I don't. I always
Okay.
forgot because like our conversation is like always something different. Like
that's fair. That's true. We've talked about it. We'll put out what we're doing next. You'll see, podcast listeners, which game we go with next. We've got a couple bouncing around. But thank you, ZP, once again for being involved in this.
Yeah, I guess the next. Well, technically, Gino, the next podcast that we record together is my clapback, as they say.
Yes, I will play Hatoful Boyfriend soon. Thank you, Rorie.
Thank you for having me.
And reminder, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got comment sections and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And you can support the show, patreon.com/deeplistens. Till next time, peace!